Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Seen, where curiosity slows down, science settles in, and the strange stories of the ancient world are allowed to unfold at a gentle pace. Tonight, we are drifting far away from familiar shores, far away from modern beaches, fishing boats, whale songs, and the bright blue oceans we know today. We are going back to a time before humans, before cities, before grass covered the land in the way we know it, before the first whale ever rose to breathe at the surface, and long before the famous shadow of Megalodon moved through the seas. Because before Megalodon, there was another kind of ocean ruler. Not a shark, not a dinosaur, not a whale, but a giant marine reptile with a heavy skull, a short neck, 4 powerful flippers, and jaws built for one very serious job: catching whatever was unlucky enough to be in front of them. Its name was Pliosaurus. And if Megalodon is the sea monster most people know, Pliosaurus is the one waiting farther back in time, in darker water, with older teeth. Now, before we go any deeper, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Are you near the sea, somewhere inland, tucked away in a quiet room, or maybe lying there with the lights low while the modern world slowly stops making demands of you? And if you happen to know, what time is it where you are? It feels only right to ask, because tonight's journey is not just across the ocean. It is across a very large stretch of time, about 150 million years of it, give or take a few ancient tides. That is a lot of time to travel while getting comfortable. So settle in however you like, let your shoulders loosen, let your thoughts stop swimming quite so fast. And if this quiet trip into prehistoric seas gives you a bit of calm, or a bit of wonder, or simply something interesting to rest your mind on at the end of a long day, I'd be ever so grateful if you gave the video a like and maybe subscribed. It helps this little corner of calm reach more curious listeners who enjoy science served softly, with fewer loud noises and ideally, no actual sea monsters under the bed. Though tonight, to be fair, the sea monster is very much the point. When most of us hear the words prehistoric ocean predator, our minds often swim straight to Megalodon. That huge extinct shark has become the celebrity of ancient seas. It turns up in documentaries, films, thumbnails, posters, and the occasional wildly dramatic internet debate about whether it might still be hiding in the deep ocean. It is not, by the way. Very sorry to anyone hoping to avoid swimming forever. Megalodon was real, and it was enormous, but it lived much later than Pliosaurus, mostly during the Cenozoic era, millions upon millions of years after the Jurassic seas had already changed beyond recognition. Pliosaurus belonged to a much older world. Its ocean was not the ocean of whales and seals. It was the ocean of ammonites, belemnites, ichthyosaurs, marine crocodile relatives, long-necked plesiosaurs, strange fish, and reefs filled with life that would look both familiar and deeply wrong to modern eyes. The continents were arranged differently. The climate was different. The seas moved through different coastlines. Even the air above the waves belonged to a planet still busy making the future. And somewhere in those waters, Pliosaurus moved. A pliosaur was a kind of short-necked plesiosaur, part of a wider group of extinct marine reptiles. Pliosaurs had large heads, powerful jaws, sharp teeth, streamlined bodies, and 4 paddle-like limbs used for swimming through Mesozoic seas. They were not dinosaurs, even though they lived during the age of dinosaurs, and they were not fish, even though they spent their lives in water. They were air-breathing reptiles that had returned to the sea, which is a wonderfully inconvenient life choice when you think about it. Imagine becoming one of the most feared predators in the ocean and still needing to come up for air. Nature does enjoy adding small complications. The name Pliosaurus itself means something close to more lizard, which feels almost unfairly mild for an animal that could look like a nightmare built around a mouth. It sounds less like the name of an apex predator and more like a note someone might write on a museum label after running out of coffee. More lizard, as if the first lizard was not quite enough. as if the Jurassic seas required an upgraded version, one with a skull the length of a dining table and teeth that did not seem interested in polite negotiation. But names can be misleading. Pliosaurus was not simply a bigger version of something ordinary, it was a specialist, a marine hunter shaped by millions of years of evolution into a body plan that made sense in dangerous water. Its neck was short compared with the long-necked plesiosaurs it was related to. Its skull was large, its jaws were deep and strong. Its teeth were made for gripping, puncturing and tearing. Its limbs were not legs anymore, but broad flippers, each one moving through the water with force. It did not need to look elegant in the way a dolphin does. It needed to reach prey, close distance, bite hard, and hold on. And that is where the story begins to feel different from Megalodon. A giant shark is familiar in a way, even if the scale is frightening. We know sharks. We have seen the outline, the tall fin. The pointed snout, the steady, efficient swimming. Megalodon, for all its size, belongs to a shape our minds can understand. It was an enormous version of a predator that still has living relatives. But Pliosaurus came from a more alien branch of the ocean's history. It was a reptile built for the sea, not like a crocodile exactly, not like a turtle, not like a whale, not like anything alive today. It had the basic honesty of a predator, but not the comfort of familiarity. If one passed beneath you in a Jurassic sea, your brain might not have had time to categorize it. It would have been too large, too strange, and far too close. Of course, we should be careful. Pliosaurus is not one single, perfectly known monster preserved for us in full, as if nature kindly left a complete instruction manual in stone. Much of what we know comes from fossils, and fossils are often incomplete. A skull here, a jaw there. Vertebrae, teeth, pieces of limb, fragments carried through deep time and lifted from cliffs, islands, quarries, and museum drawers. Paleontology is partly science, partly patience, and partly trying to understand an entire animal from the bits that survived being buried, crushed, mineralized, exposed, collected, cleaned, studied, argued over, and occasionally misplaced by someone in a waistcoat 100 years ago. Still, the pieces are enough to tell us that these were serious predators. Some species of Pliosaurus had skulls around 2 meters long, and a giant Pliosaurus skull from the late Jurassic rocks of Dorset in England was described as a new species, Pliosaurus cavani. Researchers described these late Jurassic animals as large-bodied predators with robust skulls and teeth suited to feeding on large prey. That is the polite scientific way of saying that if you were a medium-sized marine reptile in the same water, you probably had a stressful afternoon ahead of you. There is also Pliosaurus funke, the animal once nicknamed Predator X, which sounds like the title of a film that would definitely have too many explosions in the trailer. Its fossils were found in Svalbard, in the Arctic, and it was formally named in 2012. Early media reports made it sound almost impossibly huge, with dramatic claims about size and bite force. Later scientific discussion has been more careful, because the fossils are incomplete, and big animals deserve accurate measurements as much as dramatic music. Even with that caution, Pliosaurus funke remains one of the largest known pliosaurs, and certainly one of the most attention-grabbing marine predators of the Jurassic world. That balance matters. Because tonight we are not here to turn Pliosaurus into a cartoon monster, we are here to meet it properly. Not as a fantasy creature, not as a villain, not as a prehistoric jump scare with flippers, but as a real animal from a real ocean. It had muscles, senses, hunger, limits, injuries, instincts, and probably many ordinary days where nothing especially cinematic happened. A predator does not spend every moment roaring at the camera. Most of the time, even a sea monster is just trying to live, breathe, search, rest, and avoid wasting energy, which, honestly, is a schedule many of us can understand. There is something calming about that thought. Pliosaurus was terrifying from the point of view of its prey, no doubt, But it was also part of an ecosystem. It was not evil. It did not rule the seas in the way a king sits on a throne, signing documents and looking disappointed in advisors. It ruled in the older, simpler sense. It occupied a place near the top of the food web. Its body allowed it to hunt large animals. Its presence shaped the behaviour of other creatures. Smaller marine reptiles, fish, and squid-like animals lived in a world where danger could arrive from below, from behind, or from the blue distance ahead. Before Megalodon's triangular teeth ever entered the story, the seas had already known this kind of pressure. They had known giants. They had known sudden movement in dim water. They had known jaws closing. But let us begin gently, because even ancient terror can be approached softly when the lights are low. Imagine the sea surface at dusk, not today, but in the late Jurassic. The air is warm. The land nearby is not shaped quite like the maps on your wall. There are no gulls crying above modern harbours, no engines, no plastic bottles bobbing along in the current, no distant lighthouse sweeping its beam through the mist. The water is alive, but not with the animals you expect. Beneath the surface, ammonites drift with coiled shells. Fish move in quick silver turns. Belemnites, relatives of squid, pass through the water like small pointed shadows. Farther out, an ichthyosaur rises for air, its body shaped a little like a dolphin's, though it is no dolphin. Somewhere else, a long-necked plesiosaur moves with its small head held forward, its four limbs beating through the sea in slow underwater flight. And then the mood changes, not with thunder, not with music, just with the arrival of something large enough that smaller animals would be wise to move. Pliosaurus does not need to announce itself. It is not interested in being dramatic. It is heavy-headed and powerful, moving with purpose. Its flippers push against the water. Its eyes scan a world where visibility may shift from clear to cloudy, from sunlit shallows to darker depths. Its jaws are closed for now, which is probably the best way for them to be if you happen to be nearby. The skull is long. The teeth are set in rows and the body behind it is built around the simple demand of marine hunting. Get close, strike, hold, feed, continue. There is no Megalodon here. There will not be one for a very long time. The famous giant shark belongs to a later age, when the dinosaurs were already gone, when marine reptiles like Pliosaurus had vanished, when mammals were changing and whales had become part of the sea's story. Megalodon was a ruler of its own time, but Pliosaurus ruled before that world existed. It belonged to an older dynasty of ocean predators, one written not in shark cartilage and serrated teeth, but in reptile bones, massive skulls, and fossils locked inside stone for more than 100 million years. That is the great surprise of this animal. It reminds us that the ocean has had more than one age of monsters. We sometimes talk about prehistoric life as if it were one crowded room. Dinosaurs in one corner, mammoths in another, megalodons circling the snack table, and something with too many teeth making everyone uncomfortable near the curtains. But deep time is not a crowded room. It is a long sequence of worlds. Creatures we casually place together were often separated by tens of millions of years. Stegosaurus was already ancient history by the time Tyrannosaurus rex appeared. Megalodon came long after the last non-bird dinosaurs disappeared. Pliosaurus lived in a sea that Megalodon never knew. So tonight, we're giving this older predator its own space, not as a footnote before the shark, not as a warm-up act, but as one of the great marine hunters of the Mesozoic seas. And it is worth pausing on that word, Mesozoic. It means middle life, and it covers the long era when dinosaurs dominated land, pterosaurs flew overhead, and marine reptiles filled the seas. The Mesozoic was not a single scene. It stretched across the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. During that vast span, the oceans were home to whole groups of reptiles that later vanished completely. Ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, pliosaurs, mosasaurs, and others. Some looked streamlined and fish-like. Some had long necks and small heads. Some, like Pliosaurus, went in the opposite direction and developed large heads, short necks and jaws that made subtlety unnecessary. The ocean, after all, rewards many designs. A small animal can survive by hiding. A fast animal can survive by fleeing. A strange animal can survive by doing something no one else is prepared for. And a very large animal with a powerful bite can survive by convincing everyone else, through experience, not to be in the same place at the same time. Pliosaurus was part of that last category. Still, even a giant has beginnings. It came from a long evolutionary history of reptiles that adapted to marine life. Its ancestors were not born as perfect ocean hunters. Over generations, limbs changed, bodies changed, hunting strategies changed. The sea did not transform them overnight. It shaped them slowly, with every successful chase, every missed meal, every young animal that survived long enough to have young of its own. Evolution is not tidy. It does not sit down with a sketchpad and design a monster. It works with what is already there, adjusting, testing, keeping what helps, discarding what does not, and occasionally producing something that looks as if it belongs on the cover of a book titled "Please Do Not Swim Here." Pliosaurus was one of those results, and yet what we call a sea monster was once simply an animal at home. That is one of the strange comforts of paleontology. It takes the impossible looking and makes it real. A fossil tooth is not just a scary object in a display case. It is evidence of a mouth. A jaw is evidence of feeding. A flipper bone is evidence of movement. A skull is evidence of senses, breathing, muscle attachment, and a life spent inside a body that had to work. The more we study these remains, the less they become monsters, and the more they become creatures. Still frightening, yes. Still dramatic, certainly, but also understandable. As understandable as anything can be after 150 million years. The fossils from Dorset, Svalbard and other places have helped researchers piece together the shape and scale of these animals. Some discoveries are especially striking, like the highly complete pliosaur skull from the Jurassic coast of Dorset that went on display at the Etchers collection in Kimmeridge. Reports described it as about 2 meters long and around 150 million years old, one of the most complete examples of its kind. A skull like that does not whisper. Even in silence, it tells you the animal mattered. But a skull is not only a trophy of size, it is a map of behaviour. The placement of the eyes, the shape of the jaws, the size of the teeth, the strength of the bones, the way the upper and lower jaws met, all of these things give clues. Not perfect answers. Paleontology is rarely that generous, but clues. Enough to ask better questions. How did Pliosaurus hunt? Did it ambush from below? Did it chase in short bursts? What did it prefer to eat? How often did it surface to breathe? Did young pliosaurs stay in safer waters? Did adults patrol wide territories? Did they compete with each other? Did they ever bite their own kind? Some of these questions can be approached with evidence. Others remain partly in the realm of careful imagination. And careful imagination is where tonight's journey will live. Not wild guessing, not turning fossils into fantasy, but taking what science can tell us and letting the ancient sea become easier to picture. Because there is a big difference between saying Pliosaurus was a marine reptile and actually imagining one moving through dark Jurassic water. The first is a fact. The second is a door opening. And once that door opens, the past stops feeling like a list of names and dates. It starts to feel like a place. A dangerous place. Yes, a place with teeth. But a place filled with life. That is where we are headed. We will move slowly through that world. We will look at the sea Pliosaurus lived in, the body it carried, the bite that made it such a formidable predator, the animals it may have hunted, and the fossils that let us rebuild its story from stone. We will also look at why it vanished, and how the oceans later changed enough to make room for a very different giant, the shark that would one day become Megalodon. But for now, there is no need to hurry. The water is wide, the night is quiet, and somewhere below the surface of an ancient sea, long before the age of giant sharks, a heavy-jawed reptile moves through the blue. It is not thinking about fame, or fossils, or documentaries, or whether future humans will compare it to Megalodon in a video title. It is simply alive. It is breathing air, hunting in salt water, and carrying millions of years of evolution in every sweep of its flippers. The sea around it is full of movement. Small fish turn as one, and ammonite drifts lower. A long-necked reptile changes direction, and the old ocean, which has seen many shapes of hunger, makes room for one more. To understand Pliosaurus, we first have to understand the sea it lived in, because a predator is never just a predator by itself. It is shaped by the water around it, by the animals it hunts, by the temperature of the world, by the coastlines, the currents, the light, the mud, the reefs, and the long, slow accidents of evolution. A creature with a skull built like a battering ram does not appear in an empty ocean. It appears in a world full of movement, competition, opportunity, and just enough danger to make being enormous a very sensible career choice. The Jurassic period began about 201 million years ago and ended about 145 million years ago. That means it lasted for more than 50 million years, which is a difficult amount of time to picture. We are used to thinking in birthdays, appointments, weekend plans, and the occasional suspiciously fast expiring yogurt in the fridge. 50 million years is something else entirely. It is long enough for coastlines to change, seas to spread, species to rise and vanish, and entire ecosystems to become ancient before the next famous animal even enters the story. During this time, life in the oceans was especially rich, with fishes, sharks, squid-like animals, ammonites, reefs, and large marine reptiles all sharing a warmer world than the one we know now. The continents were not arranged as they are today. The breakup of the great supercontinent Pangaea was underway, and as land masses slowly pulled apart, new seaways opened and shallow seas spread across parts of the world. These shallow seas were important because shallow water can be a very productive place. Sunlight reaches down more easily. Nutrients can collect. Small animals feed. Bigger animals arrive to feed on them. Then even bigger animals arrive, having clearly read the menu from several miles away. In these waters, food chains could become crowded, busy, and dangerous. The sea around what is now Britain, for example, was nothing like the modern cold water of the North Atlantic. Much of the land that would later become Britain was covered by warm Jurassic Sea, while islands and lowlands stood nearby. The Natural History Museum describes this environment as a shallow shelf seafloor, probably calm, away from the shore and below strong wave activity, with ammonites, fish, large snails, brachiopods, burrowing creatures, marine reptiles, and other life sharing the same broad environment. That matters because some of the most famous Pliosaurus fossils come from Jurassic rocks in Britain and nearby regions. When we imagine Pliosaurus, we are not imagining a lonely monster in a black empty abyss. We are imagining an animal in a busy sea, often not too far from land, moving through waters where shells drifted, fish flashed, reptiles surfaced for air, and the seafloor held its own slow, quiet activity. It was not a modern coral reef in the tropical postcard sense, and it was not the open ocean as seen from a satellite. It was a Mesozoic marine world, warm, layered, and full of animals that had no idea they were waiting to become fossils. Above the water, pterosaurs may have crossed the sky. On nearby land, dinosaurs moved through forests of conifers, cycads, ginkgos, and other plants that would not look quite like a modern woodland. There were no flowering meadows in the way we think of them today. No grass lawns, no humans sitting on folding chairs and complaining that the beach parking was expensive. The world was green, but not familiar. The land had its dinosaurs, and the air had its flying reptiles, but beneath the water was a separate kingdom with its own rulers. And in that kingdom, reptiles had taken the sea seriously. The Jurassic seas were home to many marine reptiles, but they were not all doing the same thing. That is important. When we say marine reptiles, it can sound like one neat category, as if they all swam around together with the same basic plan and an equal interest in biting things. In reality, they were a varied collection of animals with different body shapes, different hunting styles, and different places in the food web. Some were streamlined and fish-like, some had long necks and small heads, some had bigger heads and shorter necks, some probably chased prey in open water, others may have searched closer to the seabed. The sea did not have one answer to the question of how to survive. It had many. Ichthyosaurs were among the most striking. They had bodies that can remind us of dolphins or tuna, though they were reptiles, not mammals or fish. Their shape was a case of evolution arriving at a similar solution for fast swimming in water. A streamlined body, fins, and a tail built for propulsion make sense when life depends on moving efficiently through the sea. Some ichthyosaurs had enormous eyes, useful in dim light, and some were large enough to be serious predators in their own right. They had been present since before the Jurassic, and by the time Pliosaurus entered the wider story, ichthyosaurs were already part of an old and successful marine tradition. Then there were plesiosaurs, the broader group that includes both the long-necked forms most people picture and the short-necked, big-headed plesiosaurs like Pliosaurus. Plesiosaurs were not dinosaurs, even though they lived during the age of dinosaurs. They were marine reptiles descended from land-dwelling ancestors that returned to the water. They had 4 flipper-like limbs, and all known plesiosaurs were fully adapted for life in the sea, which means they were not casually hauling themselves onto beaches for a sunbathe between meals. Their bodies belonged to the water. Their young were likely born there too, because returning to land would have been rather difficult once your limbs had become underwater wings. The long-necked plesiosaurs are the ones that often look most peculiar to modern eyes. Some had small heads, at the end of necks that seem almost unreasonable, as if evolution had been asked to design a reptile, and then someone kept adding neck bones after the meeting was over. These animals may have used their necks to approach prey carefully, perhaps helping keep the body farther away from the small fish or squid-like animals they were trying to catch. Their exact feeding strategies are still discussed, because an animal can be famous for its shape and still keep some of its habits private for 150 million years. Pliosaurs went in a different direction. They shortened the neck and enlarged the head. The result was not delicate, it was direct. A long-necked plesiosaur might suggest patience and reach. A pliosaur suggests that the front end of the animal has made all the important decisions: large jaws, strong teeth, a body behind them to drive the skull through the water. Among the largest pliosaurs, Pliosaurus itself is estimated to have reached very large sizes, and the Natural History Museum describes Pliosaurus and Leopleurodon as top predators with enormous skulls and sharp teeth, capable of delivering powerful bites. This was the sea that made Pliosaurus possible. It was a place with enough prey to support large hunters and enough competition to reward strength, speed, size, and efficiency. A huge predator needs a rich ecosystem beneath it. It cannot simply decide to be giant on a quiet Tuesday. It has to eat. It has to find prey often enough to survive. It has to grow from a smaller animal into a large one without becoming lunch itself, which is one of the life's more stressful early career stages. The presence of giant pliosaurs tells us something about the Jurassic Sea as a whole. It tells us that the ocean had the energy to support them. A useful way to picture it is to begin small. Start with microscopic life in the sunlit upper water. Tiny organisms take in sunlight and nutrients. Small animals feed on them. Fish, ammonites, and squid-like animals feed in turn. Predators take those animals. Larger predators take the predators. Energy moves upward through the food web, though never neatly, because nature is less like a ladder and more like a crowded dinner table where everyone is trying not to be the meal. By the time you reach an animal like Pliosaurus, you're looking at a creature supported by countless smaller lives below it. Ammonites were among the most common and recognisable animals of these seas. They were shelled cephalopods, relatives of squid and octopuses, with coiled, chambered shells that helped with buoyancy. Their fossils are found around the world, and they are so common in some rocks that they help scientists compare the ages of distant layers. But in life, ammonites were not decorations. They were animals moving through the water, feeding, avoiding danger, reproducing, and sometimes becoming food themselves. Some were only a few centimetres across, while others could grow much larger, even to the size of a bicycle wheel. Belemnites were there too. They were also cephalopods, more squid-like in shape, with internal hard parts that fossilise well. To a hungry marine reptile, they may have been part of the regular menu, though catching quick, soft-bodied animals is rarely as relaxing as it sounds. Fish were everywhere in many forms, including sharks and bony fish. Britannica notes that cartilaginous fish and bony fish were common in Jurassic seas, and that teleosts, the group that would become dominant among modern fishes, were becoming more modern in their structure during this period. Then there were the truly large fish. Leadsichthys, one of the largest bony fish known, lived during the Jurassic and may have reached about 20 metres in length. It was not a predator like Pliosaurus. It was a giant filter feeder, a reminder that being huge in the sea does not always require being terrifying. Sometimes it just requires a very large mouth and a calm dedication to straining tiny food from the water. Still, even a giant filter feeder could have been part of the broader world that pliosaurs inhabited, whether as a living neighbour, a possible scavenging opportunity after death, or a sign that Jurassic oceans could support animals at tremendous scale. The seafloor had its own slower drama. Burrowing creatures moved through sediment. Sea urchins, crustaceans, brachiopods, bivalves and snails lived in and on the bottom. Some places would have been calm enough for fine mud to settle, eventually preserving fossils in remarkable detail. Other areas would have been disturbed by currents, storms, animals, decay, and the everyday messiness of life underwater. Fossilization is never guaranteed. Most animals disappear completely. Bones scatter, shells break, soft tissue vanishes. To become a fossil is, in a strange way, to win a very unusual lottery after losing the ordinary one. This is why our picture of the Jurassic Sea is always partly incomplete. We know a great deal from fossils, but we're looking through a window that time has cracked, smudged, and partly covered with rock. Some animals fossilise better than others. Some environments preserve remains better than others. Hard shells and bones are more likely to survive than soft bodies. A whole ecosystem may have existed in greater richness than the fossil record can show. So when we picture the Sea of Pliosaurus, we should imagine not just the fossils we have, but the living activity around them. The animals that left no trace, the tiny swimmers, the soft things eaten before they could settle, the ordinary lives that did not become museum specimens. And through all of it, reptiles dominated the large predator roles in a way that feels strange from our modern viewpoint. Today, the largest ocean predators are mammals and fish. Orcas are mammals, sperm whales are mammals, great white sharks are fish. Large reptiles do still live in water, of course. Sea turtles, sea snakes, marine iguanas, and saltwater crocodiles remind us that reptiles never left the aquatic story entirely. But they do not rule the open seas as Mesozoic marine reptiles once did. There is no modern equivalent of a pliosaur patrolling the ocean with a skull longer than many people are tall. This is probably good news for swimmers, surfers, and anyone who already finds seaweed brushing their ankle emotionally complicated. In the Jurassic, the balance was different. Marine reptiles occupied roles that would later be taken by other animals, after the great extinctions reshaped the world. They were not temporary oddities, they were successful for tens of millions of years. Plesiosaurs survived for more than 140 million years as a group, through multiple extinction events, which is a level of persistence most household appliances can only dream of. Their success came from many forms and many strategies, but in the Jurassic Sea, the short-necked pliosaurs became some of the most imposing hunters. It helps to imagine that dominance not as constant violence, but as presence. A top predator does not need to be attacking every moment. In fact, it cannot afford to. Large animals must manage energy carefully. They cruise, wait, choose, rest, breathe, and move through the environment with an economy shaped by experience and instinct. A Pliosaurus might spend long stretches doing very little that would impress a movie trailer. It would surface to breathe, it would patrol, it might follow scents or movement, it might ignore prey that was not worth the effort, it might scavenge when the chance appeared, because a free meal is a free meal, even if you are the terror of the Jurassic Sea. Pride is not a fossil category. Still, when it did hunt, the sea around it would have mattered. Visibility, depth, current, prey size, and the presence of other animals would all influence the moment. A large marine reptile could not simply teleport into a bite, no matter how convenient that would be for a predator, and how deeply unfair it would be for everyone else. It had to close distance through water, which is thick compared with air. It had to maneuver a large body. It had to time its strike. Its prey, if alert, would not usually volunteer. This was not a simple world of monsters and victims. It was a world of senses meeting senses, bodies testing bodies, and survival being decided by fractions of movement. The 4 flippers of plesiosaurs were part of what made these animals so unusual. Instead of swimming with a fish-like tail as their main engine, plesiosaurs used their limbs in a kind of underwater flight. Research discussed by the Natural History Museum notes that the timing of front and back flipper movement could increase thrust, suggesting that their swimming was more complex and efficient than it might first appear when looking at a fossil skeleton. For Pliosaurus, this means we should not picture an awkward reptile dragging itself through water with brute force alone. It was large and heavy-headed, yes, but it belonged to a group highly adapted for swimming. The exact details of its movement are reconstructed from anatomy, comparisons, and modelling, but the basic point is clear. It was not a land animal making the best of a bad holiday at sea. It was a marine hunter whose body had been shaped for that environment. The sea was not a place it visited. The sea was its home. There is a quiet strangeness in that. Reptiles began as land animals, breathing air, laying eggs, walking under gravity in the ordinary way. Yet some lineages returned to the water and became so specialised that land was no longer an option. Their limbs changed into flippers. Their bodies became streamlined. Their lives became tied to surfacing for breath and diving again. They carried air inside themselves through a world where fish could simply extract oxygen from the water and look, one imagines, mildly smug about it. Air-breathing predators in the ocean must always keep part of their schedule open for breathing, which feels like an obvious point until you imagine a chase interrupted by the need to go upstairs. The Jurassic Sea had no sympathy for inconvenience. It rewarded whatever worked. For ichthyosaurs, speed and streamlining worked. For long-necked plesiosaurs, reach and stealth may have helped. For pliosaurs, power and a large head became the main tools. These animals did not replace one another neatly. They overlapped, interacted, competed, and divided the available ways of making a living. Some hunted fish, some took cephalopods, some attacked other reptiles, some probably scavenged. The same animal could do several of these things during its life, because wild predators do not read textbook labels. They eat what they can catch, what they can overpower, and sometimes what happens to be dead nearby, and not yet claimed by someone with a bigger mouth. This is where Pliosaurus begins to stand out from the background. In an ocean already full of predators, it became one of the animals other predators had to account for. It was not only large, it was large in a way that placed danger at the front of the body. A massive skull changes how an animal interacts with the world. It makes the bite central. It makes the head both weapon and tool. It affects swimming, balance, feeding, and the kind of prey that can be tackled. A small-headed animal may specialise in smaller, quicker prey. A large-headed pliosaur can take on larger targets, at least when the risks are worth it. The Jurassic Sea, then, was not merely scenery behind Pliosaurus. It was the reason Pliosaurus could exist. Warm, shallow seas supported rich life. Marine reptiles diversified into many forms. Fish and cephalopods filled the water. Long-necked plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs moved through the same broad world. Above and around them, coastlines shifted slowly over geological time, and beneath them, sediments gathered the remains of animals that would one day be found in cliffs and quarries. If you could drift there safely, and safely is doing a heroic amount of work in that sentence, the first thing you might notice would not be Pliosaurus. You might notice the warmth, the different coastline, the absence of modern seabirds, the strange shells, the fish, the way the water carries shapes you recognise only halfway. A coiled ammonite turns gently. A school of fish changes direction. A long-necked plesiosaur moves in the distance, its body larger than its delicate head suggests. An ichthyosaur breaks the surface, breathes, and slips under again. The scene is full enough already. Then, somewhere beyond the clearer water, a heavier form moves into view. Not fast at first, not rushing, just present. The head is too large to mistake. The neck is short. The body follows behind, driven by 4 strong flippers. This animal is not passing through by accident. It belongs here as much as the ammonites, the fish, the mud, and the warm current. It is part of the system, made by it, and making changes within it. Smaller animals respond because responding is often the difference between living and becoming part of someone else's very efficient afternoon. This is the ocean before Megalodon. Older, warmer, reptile-ruled and full of life that would vanish long before humans began giving names to monsters. It was not a failed version of the modern sea. It was its own complete world, its own food webs, its own dangers, its own ordinary days. And in those days, Pliosaurus was not a legend, not a headline, not a comparison point for a shark that had not yet evolved. It was simply one of the great facts of the water, a large shape, a strong swimmer, a mouthful of teeth. And as we move closer to the animal itself, away from the wider sea and toward the body that made it so formidable, the question becomes less about what kind of world could hold such a predator, and more about what kind of predator the world had built. It had built an animal with the front end of a nightmare and the practical habits of a working predator. Pliosaurus was not a monster in the fairy tale sense. It did not exist to guard a cursed cave, sink ships, or wait patiently for dramatic music. It was a real marine reptile, breathing air, swimming through salt water, growing from a young animal into an adult, hunting because it had to, and carrying one of the most intimidating skull designs the Jurassic Sea ever produced. Pliosaurs as a group were large carnivorous marine reptiles with massive heads, short necks, streamlined bodies, powerful jaws, large teeth, and 4 large fins for swimming through Mesozoic seas. They belonged to Plesiosauria, the same larger order as their long-necked relatives, but they took that body plan in a very different direction. If the long-necked plesiosaurs were the patient reaches of the ancient ocean, Pliosaurus was the heavy tool at the other end of the toolbox. That short neck is important. In many animals, the head and neck tell you a lot about how they made a living. A long neck can help an animal reach, sneak, probe, or feed from a distance. A small head may suit smaller prey. A long, delicate jaw can be useful for catching fish. But Pliosaurus was not built around delicacy. Its neck was reduced, its head was enlarged, and its whole body seemed to say, in the calmest possible Jurassic language, "Let us solve this problem with jaws." And what jaws they were. Some species of Pliosaurus had skulls around 2 meters long. The skull of Pliosaurus caveni from Dorset, England, was described in scientific detail as nearly 2 meters long, with a long snout and a broad temporal region behind the eyes. Those broad areas of the skull are not just empty decoration. They are part of the architecture associated with jaw muscles, the kind of bony framework that helps turn a skull into a powerful feeding machine. The same study described late Jurassic Pliosaurus species as large-bodied animals with robust skulls, skull lengths of about 1.7 to 2.1 meters, and teeth suited to feeding on large prey. A skull 2 meters long is hard to imagine properly until you put it beside ordinary things. It is about the height of a tall person lying sideways. It is longer than many sofas are deep. It is longer than most dining tables are wide. It is the kind of skull that would make a museum visitor stop walking, even if they had only come in to escape the rain and find the cafe. And this was just the head. Behind it was a muscular marine reptile with a body, tail and 4 flippers, moving through water that was already full of animals trying very hard not to be noticed. The shape was strange by modern standards. Pliosaurus was not shaped like a shark, although both were ocean predators. A shark has a body organised around a powerful tail and a cartilaginous skeleton. Pliosaurus had a reptile skeleton, a large bony skull and 4 limbs modified into flippers. It was not a whale, because whales would not appear until much later. It was not a crocodile, though the large jaws can make the comparison tempting. It was its own thing, one of those extinct designs that reminds us the ocean has tried many ways of making a top predator, and this particular design put a lot of confidence in the mouth. The teeth were not flat grinding teeth. They were not little nibbling teeth. They were long, conical, pointed weapons for gripping and puncturing. In Pliosaurus cavani, the teeth were described as subtrihedral, meaning they were somewhat 3-sided in cross-section, and the scientific authors linked that kind of robust dentition with macropredatory habits. Macropredatory is a useful word because it sounds calm and academic, while meaning, in plain speech, this animal was equipped to attack large prey. There is something almost funny about the gap between scientific language and the animal itself. A paper may say robust skull and macropredaceous habits, while your brain, looking at the fossil, quietly says, absolutely not. I am not going in that water. Both reactions are valid. One is better for research. The other is better for personal safety. The skull also gives Pliosaurus a different kind of presence from many other marine reptiles. In long-necked plesiosaurs, the body and neck stretch the animal into an odd, almost graceful shape. In ichthyosaurs, the dolphin-like outline can feel familiar, even friendly if you forget the teeth for a moment. But with Pliosaurus, the head dominates the whole impression. You notice the skull first. The animal seems to arrive mouth first, as if evolution got very enthusiastic about the feeding end, and then remembered just in time that it needed the rest of the body to move it around. That does not mean the rest of the body was unimportant. It was crucial. A giant skull is only useful if you can bring it to the prey. Pliosaurus belonged to a group of plesiosaurs that swam with 4 flipper-like limbs. The Natural History Museum notes that plesiosaurs had a unique swimming style using 4 flippers to push through water, and that some members of the group evolved short necks with very large jaws and teeth, instead of the long-necked form. So, picture the body as the engine and steering system behind the bite. 4 flippers working through thick water. A broad torso carrying muscle and organs. A short tail that was not the main driving force in the way a shark's tail is. The body had to manage a heavy skull, surface for air, move efficiently enough to hunt, and remain stable while the jaws did their unpleasantly effective work. This was not a simple floating head with teeth, though one suspects its prey may not have spent much time appreciating the difference. A good predator is not only strong, it must also be coordinated. It must aim, turn, judge distance, and decide when to strike. It must not waste energy on every moving thing. A large hunter that chases every fish it sees will soon become a tired large hunter, and then possibly a dead one, which is a poor result after millions of years of evolutionary effort. Pliosaurus would have needed to choose opportunities. A sick or injured animal, a smaller marine reptile, a fish large enough to matter, a squid-like animal that came too close, a carcass drifting or settling in the water. The sea does not reward pickiness beyond reason. If meat is available, a predator usually does not ask whether it fits the brand. There is no reason to imagine Pliosaurus as constantly attacking everything. That is a movie habit, not an animal habit. Real predators spend much of their time conserving energy. Lions sleep, crocodiles wait, sharks cruise, orcas travel, rest, socialize and hunt when the moment is right. A Pliosaurus likely had long stretches of ordinary animal life. It surfaced to breathe, it moved through its range, it responded to hunger, injury, competition, and changing conditions. It did not need to be dramatic every minute. The skull was dramatic enough on its own. Still, a skull like that changes the atmosphere. The recently displayed Dorset Pliosaurus skull, sometimes called C-Rex in popular coverage, gives a vivid modern example of how imposing these animals were. Guinness World Records lists the 2022 Etches Pliosaurus skull from Dorset as about 95% intact by surface area, just under 2 meters long, about 0.6 meters wide, with both jaws, partial vertebrae, and around 130 teeth. It was dated to about 155 million years old and placed on public display at the Etches collection in Kimmeridge. A fossil like that is more than a big object. It is a face from a vanished sea, not a soft face, admittedly, not the kind of face one would want appearing beside the boat during a peaceful holiday. But it is a face in the biological sense. It held eyes, nostrils, jaw joints, muscles, nerves, and teeth. It once opened and closed. It once moved through water attached to a living body. It once belonged to an animal that knew nothing about being rare, famous, restored, measured, photographed, or stared at by humans wearing museum stickers. And that is one of the best ways to meet Pliosaurus. Not as a name first, but as a living body. Start at the snout. It was long, strong, and lined with teeth. At the very front, the jaws would have been able to seize prey. Farther back, the teeth and jaw shape helped hold what was caught. Unlike mammal carnivores, which often have specialized teeth for slicing, crushing, and chewing, many marine reptiles used repeated gripping, puncturing, shaking, and tearing. Food did not need to be neatly chewed at a table with napkins and a small, awkward conversation about the weather. It needed to be subdued and swallowed in pieces or whole, depending on size. Move back to the eyes. Pliosaurus had to see in water where light changed constantly. Near the surface, sunlight could scatter and flicker. Deeper down, colours faded. In cloudy water, shapes might appear and vanish. A predator needed to track movement, contrast, and distance. We should be careful not to invent precise behaviour we cannot prove, but the basic demands of the environment are clear. Hunting underwater requires senses that can function in a moving, shifting, three-dimensional world. A prey animal can go left, right, up, down, forward, back, or attempt the classic survival method known as panic in every direction at once. Behind the eyes, the skull widened into the region associated with muscle attachment. This is where the fossil begins to feel less like a scary ornament and more like engineering. A powerful bite is not made by teeth alone. Teeth are the tools at the edge. The force comes from the muscles, the leverage of the jaws, the shape of the skull, and the ability of the bones to handle stress. A flimsy skull with large teeth is like a cheap umbrella in a storm. It looks prepared until the moment it matters. Pliosaurus had the stronger arrangement, a skull built to deal with force. The lower jaw had to meet the upper jaw with enough control to grip prey without breaking itself. That may sound obvious, but it is worth saying. Powerful animals are not simply maxed out machines. Their bodies are compromises. Too much weight can slow movement. Too much force can stress bone. Teeth can break. Jaws can be injured. Large predators live with risk because their meals often fight back. If Pliosaurus attacked another marine reptile, it was not biting a sandwich. It was biting muscle, bone, scales, flippers, teeth, and panic. That brings us to the name itself. Pliosaurus is a genus, not just a single individual. It includes several species, and like many fossil groups, its classification has been revised as researchers study old specimens, discover new ones, and compare details more carefully. This is normal in paleontology. Fossils do not arrive with labels tied neatly around them. A bone may be named one thing in one century and reinterpreted in another. A fragment may seem huge until better proportions are known. A skull may sit in a museum collection for years before new methods reveal its importance. Paleontology is not a finished map. It is a map being redrawn as more coastlines appear. Pliosaurus cavani is one of the best-known examples from England. It was described from a large skull and lower jaws found in the Kimmeridge Clay Formation of Dorset. The scientific description emphasised that the specimen was well preserved, that it represented a new species, and that late Jurassic Pliosaurus species had robust skulls and teeth associated with large prey feeding. Then there is Pliosaurus funki, the plesiosaur from Svalbard that became famous under the nickname Predator X. The nickname sounds as if it escaped from a theme park gift shop, but the animal behind it was real. Britannica describes Predator X as Pliosaurus funke and places it among the notable giant pliosaurs, though estimates for very large fossil animals can be revised as scientists examine the material more carefully. That last point matters because prehistoric giants attract exaggeration the way kitchens attract mysterious crumbs. The bigger the animal, the more tempting it becomes to stretch it just a little. A few meters here, a few tons there. Soon every ancient predator is the biggest, strongest, most terrifying creature that ever lived, and the poor fossil is sitting quietly in a drawer, wishing everyone would calm down. Pliosaurus does not need exaggeration. A marine reptile with a 2-meter skull and a bite built for large prey is already impressive. Making it absurdly larger does not help the animal. It only makes the science foggy, so the honest version is strong enough. Pliosaurus was huge by the standards of most animals. Some pliosaurs reached lengths that put them among the largest predators in ancient oceans. The Natural History Museum states that Pliosaurus is estimated to have grown to as much as 13 meters long, while Pleurodon probably reached around 10 meters in its largest forms. Both are described as top predators with enormous skulls and sharp teeth, capable of powerful bites. A 13-meter animal is not something you casually overlook. That is longer than many buses, longer than a small fishing boat, longer than a room most of us have ever slept in. But again, size alone is not the whole story. A long animal can be harmless. A whale shark is enormous and feeds mostly on tiny organisms. Leadsichthys, the Jurassic giant fish we mentioned before, was huge but not a hunter of large prey. Pliosaurus combined large size with predatory equipment. It was not just long, it was armed. And the heavy jaw is what gives this animal its special place in the imagination. Think of a modern crocodile for a moment. Not because Pliosaurus was a crocodile, but because crocodiles help us understand the feeling of a reptilian predator with powerful jaws. A crocodile does not need to look busy. It can rest at the surface with only part of the body visible. Then, in a short, violent burst, everything changes. Pliosaurus likely had a very different lifestyle in open water, but the same basic truth applies. When a large reptile is built around jaws, the quiet moments can be just as unsettling as the strike. The danger is present even when nothing is happening. In Pliosaurus, the jaw was not only heavy in appearance, it was part of a feeding system aimed at controlling prey in water. Water makes every struggle different. A bite can drag an animal sideways. A twist can use the resistance of water to tear tissue. A wounded animal may bleed, slow, and become easier to follow. A prey animal may dive, turn, or roll. A predator has to stay attached or strike again. The bite is not a single dramatic freeze frame. It is part of a sequence. That sequence began with approach. A Pliosaurus might detect movement, shape, or scent. It might angle through the water with slow confidence. The foreflippers could help it adjust its position. The head, large and heavy, would face the target. If the prey noticed too late, the final distance might close quickly. The jaws would open, the teeth would spread. The upper and lower jaws would come together with force. Then the animal would hold on, not because it was angry, but because holding on is what teeth like that were for. There is no need to add roaring. Underwater roaring is mostly a human invention, and also a questionable use of breath when you're an air-breathing reptile. If anything, the real scene may have been more frightening because it was quieter. Water muffling motion, a dark shape appearing, a rush, a bite, bubbles, silt, the flash of a flipper. Then the sea becoming ordinary again, because ecosystems do not pause for dramatic effect. The heavy-jawed giant also had to breathe. This is easy to forget because fossils do not breathe, and reconstructions often show marine reptiles permanently underwater like fish. But Pliosaurus was a reptile. It had lungs. It had to surface. That means its hunting life was shaped by air. Dive, search, move, strike, rise. The need to breathe may have influenced how long it hunted at depth, how it rested, and how it moved through different parts of the water column. Even the most frightening animal in the sea still had to obey the simple rule of oxygen. Nature gives with one hand and taps the watch with the other. Its young would have faced a different world from the adults. We do not have to imagine baby Pliosaurus as tiny versions of the full horror, though that image does have a certain unpleasant charm. Young animals would have been smaller, more vulnerable, and probably focused on smaller prey. In many predator species, the role an animal plays changes as it grows. A juvenile may hunt fish or squid-like animals. A large adult can attempt bigger prey. Growth changes the menu, and with it, the risks. To survive long enough to become one of the giant adults, a young Pliosaurus had to avoid being eaten by other predators, possibly including larger pliosaurs. Family gatherings may not have been especially warm. This is another reason to avoid treating Pliosaurus as a single fixed monster. It had a life history. It hatched, or was born, grew, learned through instinct and experience, competed, healed from injuries or failed to heal, found food, avoided danger and eventually died. Some deaths left no trace. A few bodies or body parts entered conditions that allowed fossilization. Most disappeared into the sea, recycled by scavengers, bacteria, sediment, and time. The animal we meet in museums is not the whole animal. It is the part time failed to erase. Yet what survives is enough. A skull can tell us that this was a predator with a strong front-end feeding system. Teeth can tell us about prey capture. Jaw proportions can suggest bite mechanics. Fossil localities can place the animal in particular seas and times. Related animals can help reconstruct the missing parts. Every fossil is a piece of evidence, and every reconstruction is built from evidence plus careful comparison. The result is never perfect, but it is far from guesswork. It is a disciplined way of listening to bones. And the bones of Pliosaurus say something very clearly. This was not a background animal. It was not a small specialist tucked quietly into a narrow corner of the ecosystem. It was a large marine reptile capable of taking large prey, living in seas already crowded with other successful hunters. Its heavy jaws were not decorative. Its short neck was not a mistake. Its four flippers were not awkward leftovers. The whole animal formed a working design for predation in the Jurassic Ocean. So when we call Pliosaurus the sea monster before Megalodon, we should hear both parts carefully. Sea monster, because to human eyes it has every feature needed to earn that title. Before Megalodon, because it belonged to a much older world, long before giant sharks became the ocean's most famous nightmare. But beneath the title is the real animal, and the real animal is more interesting than the monster. A monster only frightens. An animal explains a world. Pliosaurus tells us that the Jurassic Sea was not gentle just because it was ancient. It had food webs, competition, injuries, failed hunts, successful ambushes, and large predators built by long evolutionary pressure. It tells us that marine reptiles once filled roles later taken by sharks and whales. It tells us that the ocean's history is not a straight line toward the animals we know now, but a series of different worlds, each with its own experiments, and this experiment had a very large head. Imagine it again, not as a fossil, but alive. The body below the surface, the flippers moving with steady force, the short neck holding the skull forward, the jaws closed, teeth hidden just enough to make the skull's size feel almost calm. It rises toward the surface, breaks through, takes air, and sinks again. For a moment the water smooths over the back. Then the shape drops into deeper blue, where fish scatter and another marine reptile changes course. The heavy-jawed giant is no longer just a name. It is a body in motion. And once we have met that body, the next thing to understand is how it moves so effectively through water. Because a skull like that could only rule the sea if the rest of the animal could carry it into the hunt. That body was not just there to carry the skull. It was the reason the skull could matter. A huge jaw is frightening on land, but in the ocean, a jaw by itself is not enough. Water is thick. Prey can move in 3 dimensions. A fish can turn suddenly. A marine reptile can dive. A squid-like animal can vanish into darker water with a quick burst of movement and a strong desire not to become lunch. To be a successful predator in that kind of world, Pliosaurus needed more than teeth. It needed a body that could bring those teeth close enough to use. This is where the animal becomes even more interesting because Pliosaurus was not simply a floating bite. It was a swimmer, a large, heavy-headed, air-breathing marine reptile with a body plan built for moving through Jurassic seas. And while the phrase living torpedo is not perfect, because torpedoes do not have bones, lungs, hunger, or the inconvenience of needing to surface for air, it does capture something important. Pliosaurus was shaped for direct movement through water. It was not delicate. It was not slow in the way a drifting animal is slow. It was a predator with power at the front and propulsion around the body. Pliosaurs belonged to the larger plesiosaur group, and plesiosaurs had one of the strangest swimming arrangements in the history of backboned animals. They did not swim like sharks, using a powerful tail as the main engine. They did not swim exactly like crocodiles, with limbs and tail working together near the surface. They had 4 large flipper-like limbs, and those limbs were central to how they moved. Some plesiosaurs had long necks and small heads, while others, like Pliosaurus, had shorter necks, very large jaws and large teeth. The Natural History Museum describes plesiosaurs as marine reptiles with 4 flipper-like limbs, and notes that all known plesiosaurs were fully adapted to life in water. That means Pliosaurus was not an awkward land reptile that happened to spend a lot of time swimming. It was not paddling around like someone who had fallen off a boat and was pretending everything was fine. Its body was made for the sea. Its limbs had become flippers. Its torso was adapted to moving through water. Its life cycle, feeding, breathing, and movement all belonged to the ocean. It was a reptile, yes, but not a beach visitor. The beach, for an adult Pliosaurus, would have been less of a relaxing holiday destination and more of a serious mechanical problem. The 4 flippers are the key. To modernise, this arrangement can look almost odd. We're used to animals that use 2 front flippers and a tail, like seals and sea lions in different ways, or animals that use tails and fins like fish and sharks. Plesiosaurs did something unusual. They used both the front and rear pairs of limbs in swimming. A 2017 study using a robotic plesiosaur model found that the 4 flipper method could be efficient and effective, and the Natural History Museum summarises that carefully timed movement of the limbs could allow plesiosaurs to generate more thrust from the back flippers. So instead of picturing Pliosaurus as a clumsy giant hauling itself through the sea, it is better to imagine a large animal using coordinated strokes. The front flippers moved through the water. The rear flippers followed in a way that could take advantage of the flow already created. It was not random paddling, it was controlled movement. The limbs were not decorative side panels, they were part of the engine. There is something very satisfying about that. A creature that looks, at first glance, like it should be front-heavy and difficult to steer, was part of a group that survived for more than 140 million years. That is not the record of a bad swimmer. That is the record of a successful design. Plesiosaurs survived across huge stretches of the Mesozoic, through changing seas and multiple extinction events, which tells us their body plan worked very well for a very long time. Of course, Pliosaurus was not the same as every other plesiosaur. The long-necked forms had different proportions and probably different habits. In Pliosaurus, the short neck and a massive skull changed the whole balance of the animal. A heavy head creates drag. It affects turning. It affects how quickly the animal can accelerate. It affects the way the body has to support movement. The rest of the animal had to compensate for that big feeding machine at the front. This is why the torpedo comparison is useful only up to a point. A torpedo is smooth, narrow, and mechanically simple. Pliosaurus was alive. It had flippers moving, lungs filling, muscles contracting, blood circulating, senses working, and a stomach that would eventually make its opinions known. But in general terms, its body was much more compact and direct than that of a long-necked plesiosaur. With the neck shortened, the head sat closer to the body. That likely reduced some of the handling problems a long neck would create for a large predator trying to bite big prey. A long neck can be useful if you're catching small animals carefully. It can help the head approach before the whole body disturbs the water. But if your strategy involves taking larger prey with a strong bite, a long neck becomes less helpful. A long neck attached to a huge skull would create stress, drag, and possibly the kind of engineering problem that makes evolution quietly erase the sketch and start again. Pliosaurus had a shorter, stronger front section. The head was large, but it was connected more directly to the body. That made sense for a predator that needed force. Think about trying to catch something underwater. Even with human hands, it is difficult. Water slows your movement. Objects slip away. Everything pushes back. Now imagine trying to seize a strong animal with your mouth while both of you are moving, twisting, and surrounded by water. The predator needs a stable body behind the bite. If the jaws close and the body cannot control the motion afterward, the prey may pull away, injure the predator, or simply turn the whole event into a very embarrassing cloud of bubbles. Pliosaurus had to control the strike. The flippers would have helped with that. They were not just for straight-line travel. They would have allowed changes in pitch, direction, and position. A predator in water has to deal with angles. It may approach from below, from the side, or from behind. It may need to rise toward a prey animal silhouetted against brighter water. It may need to turn quickly after a missed strike. It may need to hold position near a carcass while currents pull at it. 4 powerful limbs gave plesiosaurs an unusual way to manage these challenges. This does not mean Pliosaurus was darting around like a small fish. A huge animal cannot bend the rules of size. Large bodies have inertia. Turning takes effort. Acceleration requires muscle. A 13-meter predator, if it reached that size, would not move like a mackerel. The Natural History Museum estimates that Pliosaurus may have grown to as much as 13 meters long and describes it as a top predator with an enormous skull and sharp teeth used for powerful bites. That kind of size suggests strength, but not endless speed. A predator does not need to be the fastest animal in the sea in every situation. It needs to be fast enough at the right moment. It needs to get within striking range. It needs to use surprise, angle, power, or prey choice. Modern large predators often work this way. A crocodile is not constantly sprinting through water. A great white shark does not win every chase by politely scheduling a race. Orcas can use teamwork, intelligence, and stamina. Predators succeed by using the tools their bodies give them. Pliosaurus had tools for power and direct attack. The body was likely muscular, with a broad trunk supporting the flippers. The bones of the shoulder and hip regions would have anchored strong muscles for limb movement. Each stroke had to push against water, and water is heavy to move. The flippers were wing-like in function, not bird wings of course, but surfaces that could generate forces as they moved. This is why the phrase underwater flight is often used for plesiosaur swimming. It helps explain the lifting and thrust-producing motions of the limbs, though no one should imagine Pliosaurus flapping happily like a seabird with teeth. That would be upsetting for many reasons. The front flippers may have provided major propulsion. The rear flippers may have increased thrust and helped control movement when timed properly with the front pair. The 2017 robotic study did not test Pliosaurus itself in a tank, because unfortunately no one has access to a spare living pliosaur, and if they did, grant applications would become much more exciting. But by studying the mechanics of plesiosaur-like flippers, researchers showed that the four-flipper system could work efficiently. That helps us understand why the arrangement remained successful for so long. A living Pliosaurus probably did not swim with frantic motion all the time. Large marine animals often use steady, efficient movement when travelling. The animal could cruise, using measured strokes to cover distance without wasting energy. Then, when the moment came, it could increase effort. A hunt might include a slow approach, an adjustment in depth, then a sudden push from the flippers. The skull would drive forward, the jaws would open, the body would commit. That commitment matters. A large predator cannot afford endless failed lunges. Every serious burst of speed costs energy. Every close encounter with large prey carries danger. If Pliosaurus attacked another marine reptile, that prey might bite, thrash, roll, or strike with its own body. A wounded predator could starve. A broken tooth might not be fatal by itself, but repeated injuries could matter. A damaged jaw would be much worse. Even top predators live close to risk. They just make risk look unfairly one-sided from a distance. The shape of Pliosaurus was likely a compromise between cruising and striking. A perfectly fast open water animal might evolve a more fish-like tail-driven body, like an ichthyosaur. An animal specialised for slow manoeuvring might have a different shape. Pliosaurus sat in its own category. It had the four-flipper plesiosaur system, but with a compact neck and a large head. It could likely move with enough efficiency to patrol and enough power to attack. It was not built for graceful display. It was built to make the front end arrive with consequences. This is where the animal becomes easy to imagine, but we should keep the image grounded. Picture a Jurassic sea with clear upper water and dimmer depth below. A Pliosaurus moves below the surface, not rushing. Its body is long, but not snake-like. Its neck is short. Its head is broad and heavy. The front flippers sweep down and back. The rear flippers follow, their timing helping push the body forward. The tail trails behind, not acting like the main engine of a shark, but still part of the body's balance. Every movement is slow enough to seem calm until you remember that calm can be a hunting strategy. A school of fish changes direction nearby. Not because they understand Pliosaurus in the way we understand it, with names and diagrams and museum displays, but because small animals respond to pressure, a shadow, a vibration, a movement pattern, a large shape where there should not be one. The water carries information in ways we do not notice from land. Fish sense movement through pressure changes. Other reptiles see shapes and light. A predator moving through water is never invisible, but it can still be hard to track until it is close. The heavy skull would create drag so the animal could not waste movement. Every turn of the head had physical cost. Every change in angle had to be balanced by the body and flippers. This may have made direct approaches important. Pliosaurus was not likely to flick its head around like a small bird. It would move the whole front part of the body with intention. Its hunting would depend on bringing the entire animal into the correct position, not just snapping casually from a distance. That makes the foreflippers even more important. A big head needs control. The limbs could help pitch the body upward or downward, They could help steer during an approach. They could help stabilize the animal after the bite. If Pliosaurus caught prey and the prey struggled, the flippers could help the predator maintain its position in water. The body behind the jaws was not passive, it was active support. The phrase living torpedo also brings up another useful idea: acceleration in a straight line. Many predators are not built for long chases, they are built for bursts. Pliosaurus may have used short, powerful movements rather than extended pursuit. It could have approached from an angle where prey had less time to react, then used a final burst to close distance. This would fit a heavy-jawed predator better than trying to chase fast fish endlessly through open water like a very angry submarine with poor planning skills. Still, the Jurassic Sea offered different kinds of prey. Some animals were quick and small, some were large and slower, some were injured, some were already dead. Pliosaurus did not need one hunting method for everything. A large predator can be flexible. It may ambush smaller animals when possible, attack weakened larger prey, scavenge carcasses, or compete over food. Preserved stomach contents from pliosaurs show that they ate a range of fish and squid-like animals, and tooth marks have been found on ichthyosaur and plesiosaur fossils, showing that pliosaurs interacted violently with other large marine reptiles too. That last point is worth sitting with for a moment. This was not simply a big animal eating little fish. Pliosaurs were part of a world where marine reptiles could prey on marine reptiles. The ocean was full of animals large enough to be dangerous even to each other. A pliosaurus might have hunted an ichthyosaur, a long-necked plesiosaur, or another kind of marine reptile if the opportunity was right. A bite from a pliosaur tooth on fossil bone is like a brief message from a violent moment. Not the whole story, but enough to know the interaction happened. To create those moments, the body had to function as a complete system. The lungs mattered because the animal needed oxygen. The flippers mattered because they moved and controlled the body. The skull mattered because it delivered the bite. The senses mattered because a predator has to find prey. The muscles mattered because nothing happens without force. Even the skin mattered because drag matters in water. The Natural History Museum notes that a well-preserved plesiosaur fossil from Germany suggests different skin types, with harder scaly skin on the flippers that may have helped swimming and smoother skin on the tail, or other body parts that may have reduced drag. We do not know every detail for Pliosaurus specifically, but this gives us a clearer idea of how seriously adapted plesiosaurs were for aquatic life. Their bodies were not rough drafts. They were refined by the demands of swimming. Drag, thrust, lift, stability, and maneuverability all matter underwater. A small difference in shape can change how efficiently an animal moves. For a predator that must travel, hunt, and surface to breathe, efficiency is not a luxury. It is survival. The need to surface gives the animal a rhythm. Dive, swim, hunt, rise, breathe. This rhythm would shape daily life more than constant attack would. A Pliosaurus could not stay down forever. It would have to return to the air, exposing at least part of itself at the surface. Imagine that sight from a Jurassic shoreline. A large head breaking the water, a breath, perhaps the back visible for a moment. Then the animal sinks again. No dramatic roar, no splashy performance. Just the practical business of a lunged predator taking what it needs from the air before returning to the water. That air-breathing life also means Pliosaurus occupied two worlds in a limited way. It lived in the sea, but depended on the atmosphere. It hunted underwater, but carried air from above. It could dive, but not indefinitely. That makes it different from fish and sharks, whose bodies are tied completely to water for breathing. Pliosaurus had to manage its dives. It had to balance hunger against oxygen. It had to avoid getting trapped below the surface. Even the top predator was not free from basic rules. Those rules may have influenced how it hunted. A long chase at depth might not be ideal if it burned too much oxygen. A more efficient strategy would involve closing distance with care, striking when the odds were good, and using strength rather than endurance whenever possible. This does not mean Pliosaurus could not pursue prey. It means that, like all animals, it would have worked within limits. Limits are what make predators real. Without limits, they become movie monsters. With limits, they become more interesting. And Pliosaurus is much more interesting as a real animal. Its body plan tells us about an ocean where large reptiles had taken over roles that later belonged to other creatures. Today, when we think of a fast marine predator, we may think of sharks, tuna, dolphins, or orcas. In the Jurassic Sea, reptiles had built their own answer. Not one answer, but many. Ichthyosaurs answered with fish-like streamlining. Long-necked plesiosaurs answered with reach and unusual feeding possibilities. Pliosaurs answered with a compact neck, a huge head, powerful jaws and 4 strong flippers capable of carrying that front-end weapon through the water. It is easy to focus on the terror of that design, but there is also a kind of practicality to it. The animal is not strange for the sake of strangeness. Every part had a job. The flippers drove and steered. The body housed muscle and organs. The lungs allowed air breathing. The skull seized prey. The teeth held and pierced. The short neck reduced the distance between the power of the body and the force of the bite. Nothing about the animal needs fantasy added to it. It is already enough. Now imagine the hunt from the animal's side, not the prey's. Hunger builds slowly. The Pliosaurus has been moving through a familiar part of the sea, perhaps following patterns of prey or currents. Its strokes are controlled. It is not wasting effort. Ahead, movement. Not a tiny flicker this time, but something larger. Another marine reptile or a fish big enough to be worth attention. The Pliosaurus adjusts its direction. The front flippers change angle. The rear flippers follow. The body begins to line up. There is no anger in this. No cruelty. Just the decision-making of an animal whose body has been shaped around eating meat. It closes distance. The prey turns. The predator corrects. Water pushes against both bodies. The Pliosaurus uses a stronger stroke. The skull angles forward. The jaws open. For a moment, all that anatomy becomes action. The flippers, the muscles, the streamlined body, the short neck, the heavy head, and the teeth all meet in one event. This is what the animal was built to do. Not always, not every second. But often enough that natural selection kept the design and sharpened it through generations. A living torpedo is not frightening because it is always moving fast. It is frightening because when it does move fast, it has a destination, and the destination is usually the space something else was hoping to keep for itself. After the strike, the body still matters. If the jaws connect, the prey may struggle. The Pliosaurus must hold on. The flippers may brace and reposition. The head may pull. The body may turn. Water clouds with disturbed sediment or bubbles. If the prey is large, the struggle may continue. If it is small enough, the matter may end quickly. Either way, the bite is not separate from movement. It is movement brought to a point. This is why the next part of the story has to slow down and look directly at those jaws. The body carried the bite. The flippers delivered it. The skull aimed it. But the bite itself, the force, the teeth, the way bone and muscle work together is where Pliosaurus becomes one of the most formidable predators of the ancient sea. The bite was the part of Pliosaurus that turned a large animal into something the rest of the sea had to respect. A big body can be impressive. A long shape in the water can make smaller creatures move aside. But a bite changes the rules. A bite is where size becomes contact. It is where muscle, bone, teeth, timing, and hunger all meet in one brief serious moment. For Pliosaurus, that moment was the centre of its life as a predator. The flippers brought it close, the body gave it force, the short neck kept the skull connected to the power behind it. But the jaws were where the decision was made, and they were not ordinary jaws. Pliosaurus had the kind of skull that makes you understand very quickly why ancient oceans were not peaceful aquariums with better lighting. Some late Jurassic species of Pliosaurus had skulls between about 1.7 and 2.1 meters long, with robust teeth and skulls that researchers connect with macropredatory habits, meaning these animals were suited to taking large prey. That does not mean every meal was enormous or dramatic, but it does mean the animal was equipped for serious feeding. It was not limited to tiny fish and polite nibbles. It could attack animals large enough to matter. A 2-meter skull is difficult to picture until you place it in a familiar room. Imagine a skull longer than a person lying on a sofa. Imagine jaws that could stretch across much of a small dining table. Imagine teeth not as tiny points, but as large conical tools set into a mouth designed to grip, puncture, and hold. It is the sort of head that would ruin the mood at a seaside picnic, even if it appeared only as a fossil. Alive, moving toward you through cloudy Jurassic water, it would be less of a mood ruiner and more of a complete change in life plans. The skull of Pliosaurus was not thin and delicate. It was deep, strong, and built around the practical requirements of biting large animals in water. The broad region behind the eyes gave space for powerful jaw muscles. The long snout placed rows of teeth out in front where they could seize prey. The lower jaw had to close against the upper jaw with strength, but also with enough control to keep the whole system from damaging itself. This is easy to forget. A predator with a huge bite is not just applying force to prey. It is also applying force through its own skull. The bones have to survive the attack too. Nature does not hand out powerful bites for free. A strong bite requires muscle, leverage, attachment points, tooth shape, jaw shape, and bone strength. If one part fails, the whole system becomes less useful. Teeth can break, jaws can fracture, muscle can tear. A predator that bites large, struggling prey risks injury every time it commits. This is why the bite of Pliosaurus should not be imagined as magic. It was not a cartoon clamp that closed without consequence. It was a biological machine, and like every biological machine, it had limits. Those limits make it more real. Still, even within limits, the bite was formidable. The teeth of Pliosaurus were shaped for gripping and piercing rather than chewing in the mammal sense. These were not flat teeth for grinding plants, and they were not neat slicing teeth like steak knives. They were large pointed teeth that could sink into flesh, hold slippery prey, and help prevent escape. In water, that is important. Everything is moving. The predator is moving. The prey is moving. The surrounding water pushes back. A meal does not simply sit still and wait to be swallowed, unless it is already dead, in which case it is at least being considerate. The teeth had to work in a wet, shifting, violent environment. A fish could twist, a marine reptile could roll, a squid-like animal could pull away. If Pliosaurus bit something large, the struggle could involve flippers, tails, jaws, and sudden changes in direction. A smooth body is difficult to grip. A struggling body is even worse. Teeth like those of Pliosaurus acted like anchors. Once they entered flesh, the prey's own movement could drive the teeth deeper or tear tissue wider. The bite was not just a closing motion. It was the beginning of control. That word, control, is important. Predation is not only about killing, it is about preventing escape. An animal that can wound prey but cannot hold it may lose the meal. An animal that can bite but not manage the struggle may get hurt. Pliosaurus needed to bring its mouth to the prey, close the jaws, and then keep the prey from turning the encounter into a failed attempt. The skull, neck, flippers, and body all worked together after the bite. The jaws made contact, but the body had to deal with whatever happened next. In a smaller animal, a bite might be quick and precise. In Pliosaurus, the bite was probably more like a heavy commitment. The head was large, the neck was short, the body behind it was powerful. When the animal struck, it may have used the momentum of its whole body, not just the closing of the jaws. Water would resist the movement, but mass can help. A large animal moving forward carries energy into the strike. The jaws close, the teeth sink, and the body continues to push. For the prey, there may have been very little distinction between being bitten and being hit by the front half of a living submarine with teeth. That is not a technical description, but it is a useful mental image. Scientists are careful when talking about bite force, and that care is needed here. You may see dramatic numbers repeated online, especially for giant pliosaurs such as Pliosaurus funki, the animal once nicknamed Predator X. Some popular summaries have reported extremely high bite force estimates, and Britannica notes that the jaws of Predator X have been thought to produce a bite force of about 33,000 pounds per square inch. But those numbers should be handled with caution. Fossils are incomplete, estimates depend on methods and assumptions, and early media coverage of Predator X was especially dramatic. Later discussion has emphasised that the remains were fragmentary, and that some of the biggest claims were more uncertain than the headline suggested, so we do not need to lean too hard on one exact number. The safer and more useful point is this: Pliosaurus had a skull and teeth built for powerful biting, and the fossil evidence supports the idea that late Jurassic members of this genus were large prey predators. That is already enough. A bite does not need a perfectly agreed number to be dangerous. No fish in the Jurassic Sea was pausing to ask whether the estimate had been peer-reviewed before deciding to leave the area. The shape of the skull, the size of the teeth, and the size of the animal all tell the same broad story. Pliosaurus was made to bite large things. The teeth also tell us something about feeding style. Many large predatory animals do not simply bite once and swallow. They bite, hold, reposition, shake, tear, and sometimes return for repeated bites. In water, a predator can use the resistance of the surrounding environment to its advantage. If a large animal grips prey and turns, the water resists the prey's body. That resistance can help tear flesh. Modern crocodiles use rolling and twisting movements in water, though Pliosaurus was not a crocodile and should not be treated as one. The comparison is useful only in a general sense. A large reptile with powerful jaws can use body movement after the bite to make the bite more effective. Pliosaurus may have done something similar in its own way. It could have seized prey and used body movement to tear or weaken it. It may have bitten across the body of another animal, damaging muscles, flippers, or vital areas. If the prey was small enough, it might have swallowed it with less drama. If the prey was large, the feeding process would have been messier. Ancient oceans did not come with table manners, and if they did, Pliosaurus appears to have ignored the entire section on cutlery. Fossil evidence shows that pliosaurs did not live on imagination alone. Preserved stomach contents from some pliosaurs show remains of fish and squid-like animals, and tooth marks have been found on ichthyosaur and plesiosaur fossils, showing that pliosaurs interacted as predators or scavengers with other large marine reptiles. The Natural History Museum notes that plesiosaurs had varied diets, and that the short-necked, large-jawed forms were capable of feeding on large prey. Tooth marks are especially valuable because they are not just anatomy. They are behaviour preserved in bone. A tooth mark says, at minimum, that a mouth met a body. It does not always tell us whether the prey was alive, already dead, healthy, sick, caught in a hunt, or scavenged after death. But it tells us that interaction happened. A bite mark is one of the few moments where fossil evidence records contact between animals. It is not a full video of the event. It is more like finding a single frame from a very old and very unpleasant film. Still, even one frame can be useful. If pliosaur teeth marked the bones of other marine reptiles, that means these predators were part of a food web where large animals were not safe simply because they were large. An ichthyosaur could be fast and still vulnerable. A long-necked plesiosaur could be alert and still at risk. A smaller pliosaur might itself have to avoid larger hunters. The sea was not divided neatly into harmless prey and dangerous predators. It was a sliding scale. Many animals hunted, many animals were hunted, and size only reduced risk. It did not erase it. That is one reason the bite of Pliosaurus would have haunted the ancient oceans, though not in a supernatural way. It haunted them as a possibility, a pressure, a risk built into the daily lives of other animals. The presence of a top predator changes behaviour even when it is not attacking. Prey animals avoid certain areas, they stay alert, they move differently, they form groups, change depth, alter routes, or avoid open water when possible. A predator does not need to be visible to influence a habitat. The possibility of it is enough. Imagine a long-necked plesiosaur feeding in a sunlit stretch of water. Its small head moves after fish or squid-like prey. Its body is larger and farther back, flippers adjusting gently. It has its own senses, its own instincts, its own history of survival. It is not helpless. But somewhere beyond the clearer water is the chance of a heavy skull and short neck moving into range. If the long-necked animal notices early, it may turn away. If it notices late, the difference between life and death may be the distance covered in the last few seconds. The bite is what makes that distance matter. A predator without a strong bite may chase and fail. A predator with a strong bite only needs the right opening. This is why large jaws influence an entire ecosystem. They create consequences for mistakes. A young animal wandering too far from safer water, an injured ichthyosaur swimming poorly, a fish trapped near the surface, a carcass drifting through the current. Any of these could draw attention. Pliosaurus did not need to be everywhere. It only needed to be somewhere often enough that the rest of the sea behaved as if it might be nearby. Now the teeth themselves were not indestructible. Large predators break teeth. That is a normal part of life when your mouth is also your main toolkit. A tooth that strikes bone may crack or snap. A tooth that holds struggling prey may loosen. Many reptiles replace teeth during life, and fossil pliosaurs show tooth replacement as part of their biology. A mouthful of sharp teeth is not one fixed set meant to last forever. It is a working surface, repaired and renewed over time. Nature understood the value of spare parts long before anyone tried to assemble flat-pack furniture with a missing screw. This replacement system mattered because Pliosaurus lived by its mouth. A predator that cannot bite effectively cannot feed effectively. Tooth replacement allowed the animal to keep using a dangerous feeding strategy, despite wear and breakage. But even with replacement, injuries could matter. A damaged jaw, infected wound, or serious skull injury could reduce its ability to hunt. Top predators may seem invincible from below, but they are still made of tissue and bone. They still suffer consequences. The skull of Pliosaurus also gives clues about how the jaws handled stress. A long snout must resist bending and twisting when prey struggles. The back of the skull must support muscle force. The jaw joint must transfer force while opening and closing. The lower jaw must not simply bend under pressure. In animals with powerful bites, skull shape often reflects the need to resist the forces produced by feeding. For Pliosaurus, the robust skull was part of what made a large prey diet possible. It is tempting to imagine the bite as simple crushing power, but gripping may have been just as important. Teeth designed for holding do not have to crush bone to be effective. They can pierce, anchor, and tear. If Pliosaurus bit into the side of a prey animal, the teeth could create multiple deep wounds. If the prey tried to pull away, those wounds could widen. If the predator shook or turned, the damage could increase. The bite could weaken prey through trauma and blood loss, even if it did not instantly kill. This is a more realistic picture than one dramatic snap-ending everything every time. Some prey may have died quickly, others may have escaped wounded, some attacks may have failed entirely. A predator's life includes missed strikes, broken teeth, bad choices, and long hungry stretches. The fossil record usually preserves the successful equipment, not the embarrassing moments. Somewhere in the Jurassic Sea, one imagines, a Pliosaurus probably lunged at least once at something that escaped, leaving the animal to drift there with all the dignity a giant reptile can maintain after missing dinner. That kind of ordinary failure makes the animal more believable. Even the strongest bite is only one part of hunting. The animal still had to get close. It had to judge the prey correctly. It had to avoid biting something too dangerous or not worth the effort. It had to surface for air before and after. It had to survive competition from other predators. A powerful bite gave Pliosaurus an advantage, but it did not remove the challenges of life. It made the animal formidable, not perfect. The strongest image, then, is not of constant violence. It is of readiness. A Pliosaurus moves below the surface. The jaws are closed. The teeth fit along the mouth, some visible when the lips or gums did not fully hide them, depending on soft tissue we cannot preserve with certainty. The skull is heavy and steady. The flippers work behind it. Nothing is happening yet. That is the unnerving part. The bite exists before it is used. It shapes the animal's presence even in stillness. Nearby, fish move through filtered light. Ammonites drift. A smaller marine reptile rises toward the surface. The water carries motion and scent. The Pliosaurus turns, not quickly at first, just enough to bring the head in line. The body follows. The flippers change rhythm. Distance begins to close. This is where the ancient sea becomes quiet in the mind. Not truly quiet, of course. Real water is full of sound, pressure, movement, and life. But from the point of view of a listener imagining it at night, the scene narrows. The skull moves forward. The prey turns. The predator adjusts. There is a final push from the limbs, a short acceleration, a mouth opening wide enough to show what kind of animal this really is. Then the jaws close. That closing is the whole story of Pliosaurus in one motion. 100 million years of reptile evolution behind it. A warm Jurassic sea around it. Muscles pulling, teeth entering flesh, water breaking into bubbles, a prey animal struggling, the predator holding on, no malice, no drama for its own sake. Just a body doing the work it was shaped to do, and after the bite, the sea continues. That may be the strangest part. What feels like a terrifying event to one animal is just one moment in the larger rhythm of the ecosystem. A predator feeds. Scavengers may arrive later. Bits of flesh sink. Smaller animals take what remains. Bacteria do their quiet work. Nutrients return to the water. The ancient sea does not pause to mourn or celebrate. It keeps moving, as all seas do. But the memory of that bite remains for us because the fossils remain. Skulls in museum collections, teeth in drawers, jawbones lifted from rock, marks on fossil bone, scientific papers measuring, comparing, correcting and naming. Piece by piece they let us understand that before Megalodon became the famous giant of prehistoric oceans, another kind of bite had already ruled. Not a shark bite, not a mammal bite. A reptile bite from a heavy-jawed hunter in a sea filled with ammonites, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, fish, and danger. Pliosaurus was not the only predator in that world, but its bite made it one of the predators that mattered most. A mouth like that changes the way we picture the Jurassic Ocean. It was not just a place of strange shells and graceful swimmers. It was a place where large animals could be seized by something larger. A place where the surface might look calm while violence moved below it. A place where the top of the food web had flippers, lungs, and a skull built around force. And once we understand the bite, the next question comes naturally. What exactly was unlucky enough to face it? The jaws tell us what Pliosaurus could do, but the animals around it tell us how that power was used, and the ancient menu waiting in the water was much stranger than anything found in a modern sea. The ancient menu was not simple, and it was certainly not gentle. If Pliosaurus had lived in a quiet sea with only tiny drifting animals and the occasional confused shellfish, its body would not make much sense. A skull that large, teeth that strong, and a body that powerful need a world full of worthwhile meals. They need prey with enough size, enough flesh, and enough abundance to support a hunter that could not live on crumbs. Even a sea monster, after all, has to make the numbers work. You cannot be a top predator on vibes alone, no matter how intimidating your jawline may be. So what did Pliosaurus hunt? The careful answer is that it likely hunted a range of animals, and the evidence points to a broad diet among pliosaurs. Preserved stomach contents show that pliosaurs ate fish and squid-like animals, while tooth marks found on ichthyosaur and plesiosaur fossils show that they also fed on other large marine reptiles. The Natural History Museum also notes that some pliosaurs scavenged dinosaur corpses that washed out to sea, which is a useful reminder that predators are not above accepting delivery when the ocean provides it. That makes Pliosaurus less like a picky specialist and more like a large opportunistic hunter. It probably did not swim around with a neat meal plan. Monday, fish. Tuesday, squid. Wednesday, unfortunate long-necked neighbour. Real predators are more practical than that. They eat what they can catch, what they can overpower, what they can swallow, and what they can steal or scavenge without getting injured. A large marine reptile with powerful jaws would have had options, and options are very useful in a dangerous ocean. Let us begin with the smaller prey, because not every meal had to be a dramatic battle against another giant. Fish would have been common in Jurassic seas. Some were small and schooling, moving together in quick turns that flashed through the water like scattered silver. Others were larger and more substantial. Fish are useful prey because they are abundant, nutritious, and often available in groups. The problem, of course, is that fish tend to be irritatingly good at swimming. This is one of their main talents. A large Pliosaurus was probably not wasting huge amounts of energy chasing tiny fish one by one like a frustrated dog trying to catch leaves. But larger fish, injured fish, dense schools, or fish trapped against certain underwater features could have been valuable food. A predator does not always need to outrun every fish. It needs to create moments where the fish cannot escape. It can approach from below. It can use low light. It can strike into a school. It can take the slow, sick, young, or unlucky. Nature is often less about perfect speed and more about being in the right position when another animal makes a bad decision. Squid-like animals were also part of the menu for pliosaurs. The Jurassic seas were home to belemnites and other cephalopods, relatives of modern squid and cuttlefish. These animals were quick, soft-bodied, and full of useful energy, which is another way of saying they were seafood long before humans invented lemon wedges. Belemnites had internal hard parts that fossilized, and they were common in many Mesozoic marine environments. For a predator, they would have been slippery and fast, but worth catching when possible. The Natural History Museum's summary of pliosaur feeding evidence includes squid among the preserved stomach contents of pliosaurs, showing that these animals were not only targeting large vertebrates. A Pliosaurus taking squid-like prey might not need the full force of its giant bite every time. A smaller animal could be snapped up with less effort. The long jaws and pointed teeth would help seize prey in water, where anything soft and quick can become a small underwater insult if it escapes at the last second. The prey would not be chewed in the way we chew food. It would be gripped, swallowed, or torn if necessary. A successful catch might last only a moment. A flash of movement, jaws closing, a body turning, then the sea settling again. Ammonites may also have been part of the wider marine reptile food web, though we should be careful when talking about Pliosaurus specifically. Ammonites were shelled cephalopods with coiled shells, abundant in many ancient seas. Direct evidence from a Cretaceous short-necked plesiosaur found in Hokkaido, Japan, showed ammonoid jaws preserved with the skeleton, providing strong evidence that at least some plesiosaurs ate ammonites. That does not prove every plesiosaur hunted ammonites regularly, and it does not place an ammonite neatly into the mouth of Pliosaurus in every scene. But it does show that shelled cephalopods were part of the broader feeding world of marine reptiles. Would Pliosaurus have eaten ammonites if the opportunity appeared? It is very possible, especially smaller or softer parts. but we should not imagine it crunching through large coiled shells all day like someone eating cereal with too much confidence. Ammonite shells could be tough, and different predators handled them in different ways. Some animals may have targeted the softer body, others may have taken smaller forms whole. In an ancient sea full of cephalopods, ammonites were hard to ignore. They were not scenery, they were living animals, and living animals often appear on someone else's menu. But the prey that made Pliosaurus truly imposing were the larger animals. Ichthyosaurs would have been among the most important large marine reptiles sharing the broader Mesozoic seas. They were streamlined, fast, air-breathing reptiles with bodies that can remind us of dolphins, although they were not mammals. Many ichthyosaurs hunted fish and squid-like prey themselves. Some had large eyes, useful for seeing in dim underwater conditions. Some species grew quite large. They were successful animals in their own right, not helpless extras waiting for a pliosaur entrance. That is what makes the predator-prey relationship more interesting. Pliosaurus did not live in a world where everything else was weak. It lived among other competent marine animals. An ichthyosaur could be fast, alert, and experienced. It could dive, it could turn, it could see danger. It had its own feeding strategies and its own place in the ecosystem. A Pliosaurus that attacked an ichthyosaur would need timing and power, not just confidence. Confidence is useful, but against a strong-moving animal, confidence without accuracy is just a quick way to bite water. Fossil tooth marks on ichthyosaur remains show that pliosaurs interacted violently with them, either through predation or scavenging. That distinction matters. A tooth mark on bone does not always tell us whether the animal was alive when bitten. It may have been hunted. It may have been scavenged after death. It may have been injured earlier and then consumed later. Fossils are honest, but they are not always chatty. They give us evidence of contact, not a full witness statement. Still, even scavenging tells us something. If a dead ichthyosaur drifted or sank, a large pliosaur would have been well equipped to tear into it. In the ocean, a carcass is an event. It attracts attention. Sharks do this today, crocodiles do this. Crabs, fish, worms, bacteria, and all sorts of smaller organisms join in over time. A dead large animal becomes food for many others. A Pliosaurus finding a carcass would not turn away because it preferred a more heroic meal. A free carcass in the water is not a moral dilemma. It is lunch without the chase. Long-necked plesiosaurs were another possible target. These animals were relatives of Pliosaurus, but built very differently. Instead of short necks and heavy skulls, many had small heads on long necks, with bodies driven by 4 flippers. Some may have fed on fish, squid-like animals, or smaller prey. Others may have had different habits depending on species and environment. The long neck made them famous, but fame does not make an animal safe. In fact, from the viewpoint of a heavy-jawed predator, a long neck may have been a very noticeable handle attached to a meal, though that is not a polite way to describe a fellow reptile. A large Pliosaurus attacking a plesiosaur would not be attacking something defenseless. The prey could swim, turn, dive, and struggle. Its flippers were strong, its body was large. But its head was small compared with that of a pliosaur, and its bite would not have matched the power of Pliosaurus. If the pliosaur managed to bite the body, flipper, or neck, the encounter could become one-sided very quickly. Tooth marks on plesiosaur fossils show that pliosaurs fed on other plesiosaurs, again with the same caution that the feeding could represent hunting or scavenging. It is easy to imagine the moment too dramatically, with waves exploding and animals thrashing at the surface like a scene made for a loud trailer. Some attacks may have been violent and visible, but many may have happened below the surface, partly hidden by depth, silt, and distance. A large shape approaching from below, a turn, a rush, jaws closing on a body that suddenly understands a situation too late. Then bubbles, movement, and the kind of underwater struggle that leaves very little behind unless bone is marked and buried in just the right way. There may also have been smaller marine reptiles, marine crocodile relatives, and other predators in some Jurassic ecosystems. Depending on time and place, the exact cast of animals changed. The Jurassic was not one frozen scene. It lasted millions of years, and different seas had different communities. Pliosaurus fossils are known from late Jurassic rocks in Europe and other regions, but the prey available in one sea was not identical to the prey available everywhere else. Paleontology has to be specific about time and place, even when our imagination wants one grand aquarium full of every extinct animal at once. A Pliosaurus living in one region might feed heavily on fish and cephalopods, while another individual or species in another region might encounter more marine reptiles. Young Pliosaurus would have eaten differently from adults. Smaller juveniles could not take the same prey as the largest adults. They may have hunted smaller fish, soft-bodied animals, or whatever they could safely manage. As they grew, the menu would expand. Growth changes an animal's role in the food web. A juvenile predator can be prey. An adult predator can become the reason other animals stay alert. This shift is important because Pliosaurus was not born as the heavy-jawed ruler we imagine. It had to reach that size. During its early life, it would have lived in a sea full of animals that might eat it. Larger pliosaurs, big ichthyosaurs, marine crocodile relatives, sharks and other predators could all be threats depending on the environment. Even if we do not know the details for every stage, the general rule is clear. In the ocean, being small is risky. Being small and edible is worse, which is most kinds of small. By the time it became large, Pliosaurus would have had fewer natural enemies, but not no challenges. Other large pliosaurs could compete with it. Injured prey could fight back. A hunt could fail, a tooth could break, a jaw could be damaged. Disease, parasites, starvation, and accidents still existed. The top of the food web is not a comfortable throne. It is more like a high ledge in bad weather. You are above many dangers, but you can still fall. Now, there is one prey source that may seem surprising at first. Dinosaurs. Pliosaurus did not chase dinosaurs across land. It did not climb onto beaches and drag sauropods into the sea like a reptilian fisherman with very ambitious equipment. Adult pliosaurs were fully marine animals, and their bodies were not built for land hunting. But the sea sometimes receives gifts from land. A dinosaur might die near a river. A flood could carry a carcass out to sea. A body could drift from shore into deeper water. Once there, marine scavengers would gather. The Natural History Museum notes that some pliosaurs ate dinosaurs by scavenging corpses that washed out to sea. That image is strangely practical. The great marine reptile does not need to invade the land. The land occasionally sends food. A floating dinosaur carcass would be a large, rich, temporary resource. Fish might pick at it. Smaller scavengers might arrive. Sharks could circle. A large pliosaur, if nearby, would have the jaws to tear into thick flesh and the size to dominate the meal, at least unless another large predator had the same idea. The smell of decay can travel through water. Modern marine predators can detect chemicals from injured or dead animals. While we cannot know exactly how Pliosaurus responded to every scent, a large carnivore in the sea would benefit from locating carrion. Scavenging is not laziness, it is efficiency. Hunting costs energy and carries risk. Carrion is already dead, which is a significant advantage for anyone hoping to avoid being kicked, bitten, or slapped by a flipper. This makes Pliosaurus part hunter, part scavenger, as many predators are. The line between those roles is not as clean as people sometimes imagine. Lions scavenge, sharks scavenge, bears scavenge, crocodiles scavenge. A predator that refuses available meat because it did not personally arrange the death is not noble. It is hungry for no reason. So the deep blue world of Pliosaurus offered many kinds of food. Fish in schools, larger fish, squid-like belemnites, possibly ammonites or other shelled cephalopods when available, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, other marine reptiles, carcasses, including the occasional dinosaur washed from land. The animal's bite and body allowed it to use this variety, and that variety may have been part of its success. A predator that can feed in several ways is better prepared for change than one tied to a single fragile food source. But catching prey is not just about what is available. It is also about where the hunt happens. In open water, large prey can flee in many directions. A Pliosaurus may have used depth and approach angle to reduce warning. Attacking from below could use the brightness of the surface to silhouette prey. Moving through darker or cloudier water could hide part of the approach. In shallower areas, coastlines, seafloor contours, reefs, or groups of animals could create opportunities. A fish school might bunch together, a young reptile might stray, a wounded animal might lag behind. Predation often begins with a small mistake. The sea also has layers. Sunlit water near the surface behaves differently from deeper, dimmer water. Temperature, light, oxygen, prey density, and visibility can all change with depth and region. Pliosaurus, as an air-breathing reptile, had to move through those layers with the need to surface always present. It might hunt near the surface at times, where breathing was easier and prey could be silhouetted. It might dive deeper when conditions favoured it. It may have followed prey movements across the day, though the exact patterns remain unknown. Unknown does not mean empty. It simply means we fill the scene carefully. Imagine a large fish moving through mid-water. It is alert but not panicked. Nearby, smaller fish scatter around it. Above, light breaks in shifting bands. Below, the water darkens. A Pliosaurus moves in from lower and behind, not sprinting yet, using measured flipper strokes. The heavy skull points forward. The distance shrinks. The fish turns, perhaps sensing pressure or seeing the shape too late. The Pliosaur increases speed. The jaws open. If the strike lands, the fish becomes part of the predator's day. If it misses, both animals continue, one hungry, one extremely motivated. Now imagine a different scene. A long-necked plesiosaur feeds near a group of smaller prey. Its neck moves. Its body trails behind. It is focused forward. From the side, deeper in the water, a larger shape adjusts course. This is not a high-speed chase at first. It is positioning. The Pliosaurus must bring its head to the right place. The prey must fail to move soon enough. Then the final burst begins. Against small fish, the Pliosaur may use a snap. Against a large reptile, the first bite must matter. It must injure, hold, or disable. A bite that only scrapes may not be enough. There is also the scavenging scene. A carcass drifts, perhaps bloated with gases, perhaps already torn by smaller animals. Bits of tissue trail in the water. The smell spreads. Fish gather. Sharks may arrive. A Pliosaurus approaches, and the smaller animals give way if they can. The jaws close on dead flesh. The predator pulls, twists, and tears. This is not heroic, but it is real. Ecosystems depend on this kind of recycling. Even a washed-out dinosaur becomes part of the sea. The food web of the Jurassic Ocean was not a straight line from small to large. It was tangled. Fish ate smaller fish. Squid-like animals hunted and were hunted. Ichthyosaurs hunted fish and cephalopods and could become prey themselves. Long-necked plesiosaurs caught smaller animals and could be bitten by pliosaurs. Sharks scavenged and hunted. Pliosaurs took large prey and also ate smaller prey when useful. Carcasses moved through the system. Nothing was wasted for long. That is what Pliosaurus hunted. Not one animal, but a whole world of chances. And this is where it differs from the simplest idea of a sea monster. A monster in a story often has one purpose. It appears, frightens, attacks, and disappears. A real predator has a daily life. It has successful hunts and failed hunts. It eats small food when large food is not available. It scavenges when a carcass appears. It avoids injuries when it can. It competes with rivals. It grows. ages, weakens, and eventually becomes food itself. The hunter is always part of the same system that feeds it. At the end of its life, even Pliosaurus returned to the menu. A dead giant in the sea would not stay untouched. Scavengers would feed, soft tissue would disappear, bones might scatter, some parts might sink into mud, most of the animal would vanish completely. Only under special conditions would pieces survive long enough to fossilize. Teeth, jaws, vertebrae and skull fragments might enter the rock record. Later, after millions of years, erosion might expose them. A person walking a beach or digging in a quarry might find one piece and begin the long work of asking what it meant. That is how the ancient menu reaches us. Not through a perfect list, but through stomach contents, tooth marks, fossil associations, anatomy, and comparison with related animals. Each clue is small. Together they show a predator that fed on fish, squid-like animals, marine reptiles, and carrion when the opportunity came. They show an ocean where danger moved in many sizes. They show that Pliosaurus was not only large, but ecologically important. A hunter whose presence shaped how other animals lived and died. So when we picture Pliosaurus hunting, we should not picture endless chaos. We should picture a working ocean. Most of the time, animals move, feed, breathe, hide, and survive. Then, sometimes the balance changes. A shadow lines up beneath a fish. A long-necked reptile turns too late. A carcass draws in scavengers. The heavy-jawed hunter enters the scene, and the ancient sea briefly reveals the force at the top of its food web. Then the water settles. The fish that remain keep swimming. The ammonites drift. The belemnites continue their quick little lives. And somewhere in the rocks forming below, a tooth mark, a bone, or a half-buried skull begins the slow journey toward discovery, waiting for a future world to rebuild the story from fragments. A tooth mark, a bone, or a half-buried skull can wait a very long time. That is one of the strange things about fossils. They are quiet, but they are not in a hurry. The animal dies, the sea takes it apart, scavengers feed, soft tissue disappears, bones shift, sink, scatter, crack, and settle into mud. Then the mud becomes stone. The stone becomes part of a cliff, a quarry, a seabed, or a hidden layer under someone's ordinary walking route. Millions of years pass with no announcement at all. No label appears. No dramatic sign rises from the rock saying, "Important sea monster inside, please excavate carefully." The fossil simply waits until weather, luck, erosion, and a person with sharp eyes bring it back into the world. This is why rebuilding Pliosaurus is such a careful business. We are not dealing with a complete creature delivered neatly from the Jurassic, cleaned, assembled, and ready to explain itself. We are dealing with fragments. Some are large and spectacular, like skulls and jaws. Others are small and easy to miss, like loose teeth, pieces of vertebrae, bits of limb bone, or parts of the skull that once sat deep inside the head. Fossils are evidence, but they rarely arrive as full sentences. More often, they arrive as words, commas, and the occasional very large exclamation mark. A nearly complete skull is one of those exclamation marks. One of the most important named Pliosaurus fossils is the skull of Pliosaurus cavani, from the late Jurassic Kimmeridge Clay Formation of Dorset, England. It was described in a 2013 scientific paper as a well-preserved giant pliosaurid skull representing a new species. The same study explained that pliosaurids were long-lived marine predators with a global distribution, and that species of Pliosaurus had large body sizes, skull lengths of about 1.7 to 2.1 meters, and robust teeth suggesting feeding on large prey. That sounds clean when written in a paper. A specimen, a formation, a species, a diagnosis. But the real path from cliff to scientific name was much slower, messier, and more human. The Pliosaurus cavani skull did not simply pop out of the rock like a prize from a cereal box, which would be convenient but terrible for breakfast. According to the scientific description, The specimen was collected over a period of 8 years as pieces weathered from sea cliffs at Osmington Bay. Many pieces were found in fallen blocks along the foreshore by Kevin Sheehan, a cafe owner who walked the area regularly. Some blocks weighed up to about 60 kilograms, which is the sort of detail that reminds us fossil hunting is sometimes less gentle stroll with a magnifying glass and more prehistoric weightlifting on a beach. That slow collection matters. Fossils on a coast are not safe forever. The same erosion that reveals them can destroy them. Waves, tides, storms, rain, falling cliffs, frost, and simple time can break a specimen apart before anyone understands what it is. Coastal paleontology is often a race, but a strange, patient race. The fossil has waited 150 million years, and then suddenly it has a few months, weeks, or even days before the sea breaks it into pieces. Nature is very dramatic when it finally checks the schedule. The Kimmeridge Clay Formation is especially important in this story. It is a late Jurassic rock unit in southern England that has preserved a rich record of ancient marine life. The Etchers collection in Kimmeridge describes its museum as focused on late Jurassic marine fossils from the Kimmeridge Clay and the Kimmeridgian seas around 152 to 157 million years ago, when the area was part of a warm, shallow sea. That is the kind of setting where the remains of marine reptiles, fish, ammonites, belemnites, and other animals could become trapped in sediment and, under the right conditions, survive as fossils. But even in a fossil-rich place, preservation is selective. Most animals are never fossilized. Most bones are broken, eaten, dissolved, scattered, or buried in places where they will never be found. A fossil is not a normal ending, it is an exception. A skull as complete as Pliosaurus cavani is therefore not just a specimen, it is a survival story after death. First, the animal had to die in the right place. Then parts of its skeleton had to avoid complete destruction. Then sediment had to cover it. Then minerals had to replace or preserve enough of the original structure. Then the rock had to survive geological change. Then erosion had to expose it. Then someone had to notice. That is a long chain of lucky events. And because the chain is so long, every good fossil feels slightly improbable. The fossil record is not a full archive of ancient life. It is more like a library after a flood, a fire, several burglaries, and a very confused shelving system. Some books are missing, some pages are stuck together, some are written in a language we only partly understand. And occasionally, sitting between damaged volumes, there is a nearly complete page with exactly the sentence we needed. Pliosaurus is rebuilt from those pages. Skulls are especially valuable because they contain so much information. A skull can tell scientists about bite, senses, muscle attachment, feeding strategy, taxonomy, and sometimes even growth. The shape of the snout, the arrangement of teeth, the jaw joint, the position of openings in the skull, and the proportions of different bones all become clues. For Pliosaurus, these clues are crucial because the skull was central to the animal's identity as a predator. When researchers described Pliosaurus cavani, they used the skull to revise the taxonomy and systematics of late Jurassic pliosaurids, naming not only Pliosaurus cavani, but also recognizing Pliosaurus carpenteri and Pliosaurus westbriensis from previously known material. Taxonomy may not sound soothing at first. It can sound like the part of science where everyone politely argues in Latin, but it matters because names organize evidence. If several fossils are lumped together wrongly, the animal becomes blurred. If every fragment is named too eagerly, the family tree becomes cluttered with ghosts. Scientists have to compare bones carefully and ask which differences are meaningful. Is this a new species or just a young individual? Is it a male or female difference? Is it distortion from fossilization? Is it damage? Is it variation within a species? Fossils do not answer immediately. They make researchers work for it. Pliosaurus funki, the Svalbard pliosaur once nicknamed Predator X, is a good example of why that caution matters. The animal became famous before the formal scientific description, and early media coverage made dramatic claims about its size and bite. Later, when the fossil material was formally described in 2012, the picture became more careful. The fossils were fragmentary, and size estimates were more restrained than some early headlines had suggested. Wired's coverage of the formal naming noted that the remains were incomplete, and that the more sensational claims needed caution. This does not make Pliosaurus funky boring. Quite the opposite, it makes it real. A fragmentary giant from Arctic rocks is fascinating without turning it into a prehistoric superhero. It tells us that large pliosaurs lived in northern seas, and that the group had a broad geographic reach. It adds another piece to the puzzle of late Jurassic marine predators, but it also reminds us that big fossils often create big guesses, and big guesses need strong bones underneath them. That is one of the main lessons of Pliosaurus. The monster we rebuild must be built from evidence, not just excitement. Excitement is allowed, of course. It would be strange not to feel excited when looking at a 2-meter skull from a marine reptile with a mouthful of teeth. A person can be scientifically cautious and still have the perfectly reasonable thought, well, that is horrifying. Paleontology works best when wonder and discipline sit at the same table. Wonder gets us to look closely. Discipline stops us from adding extra meters, extra teeth, and a dramatic roar that no fossil can support. The 2022 Dorset pliosaur skull, now displayed at the Etchers collection and widely nicknamed C-Rex, shows how discovery still continues. Guinness World Records lists it as the most complete Pliosaurus skull, about 95% intact by surface area, found on the Jurassic coast of Dorset in 2022. It measures just under 2 meters long, includes both jaws, some 130 teeth, and partial vertebrae, and was cleaned and restored over 10 months by Dr. Steve Etchers, before going on public display at the Etchers collection in Kimmeridge. That is a remarkable amount of preservation for an animal from roughly 155 million years ago. The Etchers collection says the skull has been on display since January 2nd, 2024, and describes it as the permanent home of the specimen featured in Attenborough and the giant sea monster. The museum also notes that continued scientific work is expected to reveal more about the animal over time. That last part is important. A fossil going on display is not the end of the science. Sometimes it is only the beginning of a longer conversation. The discovery story of that skull is also wonderfully ordinary at first. Guinness reports that amateur fossil hunter Philip Jacobs found the tip of the snout on the beach in April 2022, which alerted scientists and collectors to the rest of the skull still in the cliff. The main skull was then extracted from the Jurassic coast in August 2022 before more erosion could damage it. That is how a sea monster can re-enter the world, not with thunder, but because someone looked down at the beach and noticed that one strange piece of stone was not just stone. There is something almost comforting in that. The ancient past is not always found by grand expeditions in remote deserts. Sometimes it's found by local collectors, museum workers, fossil hunters, people walking familiar coasts, people who know the rocks well enough to notice when the cliff has revealed something new. Paleontology is a science of expertise, but also of attention. Many important fossils have been found because someone was patient enough to look. After a fossil is found, the hard work changes form. Finding it is only the first problem. Removing it safely is another. Preparing it is another. Studying it is another. A large skull locked in rock cannot simply be pulled free like a loaf from a tin. The surrounding stone must be removed carefully. Fragile areas may need support. Broken pieces must be stabilized. The specimen may be heavy, awkward, and vulnerable to cracking. A fossil can survive millions of years underground and then be damaged by one careless afternoon in the open air. That seems unfair, but fossils have never promised to be convenient. Preparation can take months or years. Rock is removed bit by bit. Tools may range from chisels and needles to air abrasives. consolidants, scans, and digital models. A preparator must understand both stone and bone. Too much force can remove detail. Too little progress can leave important anatomy hidden. It is patient work, and very unlike the dramatic moment of discovery that gets most of the attention. Fossil preparation is where the monster is slowly allowed to become anatomy. Once prepared, the fossil must be compared. This is where the rebuilt animal becomes more than one impressive skull. Scientists compare it with other pliosaurid remains. They look at the shape of bones, tooth cross-sections, skull openings, proportions, and sutures. They ask whether the specimen matches known species or represents something different. They look for distortion caused by pressure during fossilization. They asked whether missing parts can be reconstructed from related animals. This is careful work, and it can change as new fossils appear. That is why Pliosaurus is not a fixed cartoon image. Our understanding of it changes. A new skull can clarify old material. An old specimen can be reinterpreted. A fragment in a museum drawer can become important after someone studies it with a new question. CT scanning can reveal internal details without cutting the fossil apart. Digital modelling can test hypotheses about bite, swimming, or skull strength. A fossil found in the 19th century can become part of 21st century science, which is a pleasing reminder that even old bones can update their resume. Museums play a central role in this. They do not simply display fossils for visitors, though that is important. They also protect specimens so they can be studied again and again. A fossil in a museum collection is not finished when the label is printed. It may be measured by one researcher, scanned by another, compared by a third, and reinterpreted decades later. The public sees the dramatic object in the gallery. Behind the scenes, it is also data. A Pliosaurus skull in a glass case can make a child stare. It can make an adult quietly step closer. It can make someone who thought they were only mildly interested in fossils suddenly begin imagining a Jurassic sea. That is valuable. But the same skull can also help scientists ask precise questions. How many teeth were in the jaws? What was their shape? How did the jaw muscles attach? How does this specimen differ from another species? How large might the body have been? What does the skull suggest about feeding? The same fossil can be a doorway for wonder and a tool for research. The monster we rebuild is therefore a shared creation, but not in the sense of being imaginary. It is built by finders, preparators, curators, anatomists, geologists, artists, technicians, and researchers. The fossil hunter notices something. The preparator reveals it. The geologist places it in time and rock. The anatomist compares it. The artist restores the missing body. The museum protects it. The public gives it a place in memory. Each step adds something, and each step must be honest about what is known and what is still uncertain. Uncertainty is not a weakness in this story. It is part of the story. We do not know every detail of Pliosaurus skin. We do not know exactly how every species hunted. We do not know the full range of behaviour. We do not know every stage of growth. We do not know how many species remain hidden in rocks or museum drawers. We do not know what the 2022 Dorset skull will ultimately be assigned to until full academic study is complete. Guinness notes that examination is ongoing and that it has not yet been determined whether it represents a new species or belongs to a previously described one. That kind of uncertainty can be frustrating if you want simple answers, but it is also what makes paleontology alive. The past is not just a finished book. It is a book with missing pages, and every few years someone finds a new page in a cliff. Sometimes the new page confirms what we thought. Sometimes it changes the plot. Sometimes it introduces a character no one expected. And sometimes it is just a tooth, but a tooth can be very persuasive if it belonged to the right mouth. Reconstructing the full animal also requires caution with size. A skull can suggest body length, but only if we understand proportions well enough. Different pliosaurs may have had different skull-to-body ratios. A fragmentary jaw can look enormous, but estimating the whole animal from one piece can lead to uncertainty. Researchers and responsible communicators often present ranges rather than one perfect number. This is less exciting than saying the biggest predator ever in giant letters, but it is much better science. And Pliosaurus does not need inflated numbers to feel impressive. A skull nearly 2 meters long, teeth built for large prey, a body possibly reaching lengths comparable to a bus, 4 flippers, and a place near the top of the Jurassic food web are enough. The real animal is already extraordinary. The evidence does not make it smaller in our imagination. It makes it clearer. It stops being just a vague sea monster and becomes a specific animal from a specific world. Fossils also remind us that Pliosaurus had a geography. Dorset, Svalbard, other Jurassic and Cretaceous marine deposits. These are not just points on a map. They are pieces of ancient seaways. The Pliosaurus cavani skull came from the Kimmeridge Clay Formation at Osmington Bay in Dorset. The Svalbard Pliosaurus funke material came from Arctic rocks, and its study added to understanding of giant pliosaurs in northern late Jurassic seas. The fact that related animals appear in different regions tells us that these predators were not local oddities. They were part of a broader marine reptile story. That story is preserved unevenly. Some areas are famous because their rocks are exposed, accessible and fossil-rich. Others may have held equally rich life but left fewer recoverable fossils. Some coastlines are searched by generations of collectors. Some deposits remain buried. Our view of Pliosaurus is shaped not only by where it lived, but by where humans have looked, where rock has been exposed, and where fossils were preserved well enough to survive. The fossil record is evidence, but it is evidence filtered through geology and chance. This is why one new fossil can matter so much. A nearly complete skull can show features missing in older specimens. It can clarify how bones fit together. It can reveal variation. It can test previous reconstructions. It can confirm that a feature thought to be damaged is real, or that a feature thought to be unique is more widespread. The 2022 Dorset skull, because of its completeness, may help researchers study details of Pliosaurus anatomy that are rarely preserved so clearly. For the viewer, though, there is also a simpler power in seeing the skull whole. A loose tooth is impressive, a jaw fragment is interesting, but a skull looks back at us. Even empty eye openings can create the feeling of meeting an animal. You see the length of the snout, the depth of the jaws, the tooth rows, the space where muscles once pulled. It becomes easier to imagine the head moving through water, easier to imagine the body behind it. Easier to understand why smaller creatures in the Jurassic Sea would not have treated this predator as a casual neighbour. Still, the skull is only the beginning. The rest of the body must be rebuilt from related fossils, partial skeletons, and comparisons within Plesiosauria. Pliosaurus had 4 flippers, a short neck, a large head, and a powerful body, but exact proportions can vary between species and specimens. Paleoartists and scientists work together to produce reconstructions that match the bones as closely as possible. Good paleo art is not decoration added after the science. It is a visual hypothesis. It says, based on the evidence we have, this is what the animal may have looked like, and like all hypotheses, it can change. Older reconstructions of prehistoric animals often look different from modern ones. Dinosaurs changed from tail-dragging swamp creatures to active animals. Pterosaurs changed from awkward gliders to highly capable flyers. Marine reptiles have also been revised as researchers studied their swimming, posture, soft tissue, and ecology. Pliosaurus in modern reconstructions is not a sluggish lizard lost at sea. It is a specialised marine predator. That change reflects better evidence and better methods. The fossils do not just rebuild the outside, they also rebuild behaviour cautiously. Tooth shape and skull strength suggest feeding. Stomach contents and bite marks show diet. Limb anatomy helps infer swimming. Rock layers show age and environment. The surrounding fossils help reconstruct the ecosystem. Every part of the picture depends on many lines of evidence. No single bone tells the whole story, but many bones, carefully studied, can make the ancient world less blurry. There's also a human history behind these discoveries. The Jurassic coast of southern England has produced famous fossils for more than 2 centuries. Collectors, quarry workers, scientists, local experts, and museum staff have all contributed. Not everyone received equal credit in earlier times, and the history of paleontology includes both brilliant discoveries and unfair treatment of people who made them. That is worth remembering gently. Fossils may be ancient, but the science around them is human. It includes patience, pride, mistakes, correction, and sometimes a fossil sitting in a drawer for years before someone realizes it has been waiting to change the story. Pliosaurus carries that human story too. Kevin Sheehan's years of collecting pieces from the foreshore became part of Pliosaurus caverni's scientific identity. Philip Jacobs, noticing the snout of the 2022 Dorset skull, began the recovery of a specimen now recognised as exceptionally complete. Dr. Steve Etches and others helped prepare, conserve and display material that might otherwise have been destroyed by erosion. Behind every fossil in a museum, there is usually a chain of people who saw value in stone before the rest of us could see the animal. That may be the most peaceful part of this frightening creature's story. The animal itself was a hunter, a heavy-jawed predator of a dangerous sea. But the way we know it is through care, careful collecting, careful preparation, careful measurement, careful language, careful correction. The sea monster is rebuilt not by fear, but by attention. So when we imagine Pliosaurus now, we are imagining more than one fossil. We are imagining the combined result of many fragments. The Dorset skulls, the Svalbard remains, older specimens, isolated teeth, jaw pieces, vertebrae, scientific papers, museum collections, and the ancient sediments that held them. Each piece adds a little more to the animal. Each piece also reminds us that the full living creature is still partly beyond reach. That is all right. A complete answer is not required for wonder. In fact, some missing pieces make the animal feel more real, because real history is rarely complete. We know enough to see the shape. We know enough to understand the bite. We know enough to place it in the Jurassic Sea, among fish, ammonites, squid-like animals, ichthyosaurs, and plesiosaurs. We know enough to say that before Megalodon, the oceans had already known a giant predator with jaws that deserved respect, but we also know enough to stay humble. There are probably fossils still hidden in cliffs. There are specimens not yet fully studied. There are details waiting in stone. The monster we rebuilt is not finished, and perhaps that is fitting. Pliosaurus lived in a world that kept changing, and our understanding of it keeps changing too. The old sea gives up its secrets slowly, one tooth, one jaw, one skull at a time. And as those fossils reveal how the animal lived, they also begin to point toward a quieter question. If Pliosaurus was so powerful, so well adapted, and so deeply part of its ocean, why is it no longer here? Somewhere after the age of these giant jaws, the seas changed again, and the reign of the pliosaurs began to fade long before Megalodon rose into a very different world. The fading of those giant jaws did not happen because Megalodon arrived and took the throne. That is the first important thing to untangle, because it is very easy to imagine prehistoric oceans as one long contest where the biggest monster beats the previous biggest monster, takes the crown, and swims away while everyone else updates the food chain. Nature is rarely that tidy. Pliosaurus and Megalodon were not rivals. They never met. They never crossed paths in the water. They did not circle each other in some grand ancient showdown, although one suspects the internet would very much enjoy that if it had been possible. The truth is stranger, quieter, and much wider. Pliosaurus belonged mainly to the late Jurassic world, around 150 million years ago. Its close plesiosaur relatives continued into the Cretaceous, but the great short-necked plesiosaurid line declined and disappeared long before Megalodon appeared. Megalodon, The famous giant shark lived much later, during the Miocene and Pliocene epochs, with fossils dating from about 23 million to 2.58 million years ago. That means there was a gap of tens of millions of years between the last Pliosaurid seas and the first Megalodon seas. This was not a handover. It was more like one ancient oceanic dynasty ending, the planet changing completely, and another predator rising in a different world after an enormous silence. So when we ask why Pliosaurus vanished before Megalodon rose, we are really asking how ocean worlds change. The answer is not one simple disaster. There was no single day when every Pliosaurus looked around, noticed the sea had become inconvenient, and politely resigned from the food web. The disappearance of Pliosaurus and its close relatives was part of a long pattern of ecological turnover. Seas changed. Climates changed. Prey communities changed. Competitors changed. New groups appeared. Old groups declined. Some marine reptiles survived in other forms for a while. Others faded from the fossil record. The ocean did not empty. It reorganized. That is one of the hardest things to remember about extinction. It does not always look like an explosion. Sometimes it looks like fewer species, fewer places where they are found, smaller bodies, changed diets, lost advantages, younger animals failing to survive often enough, prey becoming harder to catch, competitors becoming more common, environments shifting faster than bodies can adapt. From a distance of millions of years, all of that can look like a clean ending. Up close, it would have been made of ordinary struggles repeated over many generations. For Pliosaurus itself, the story begins with the Jurassic seas it knew so well. Those warm waters supported giant marine reptiles, large fish, ammonites, belemnites, and many other animals. Pliosaurus fit that world. It was shaped for it. Its large skull, short neck, strong bite, and foreflipper swimming made sense in a sea where big prey existed, and marine reptiles held many of the top predator roles. Pliosaurs as a broader group are known from Jurassic and Cretaceous fossils, and are described as large carnivorous marine reptiles with massive heads, short necks, streamlined bodies, powerful jaws, large teeth, and 4 large fins for swimming. But no body plan is guaranteed forever. The world after the Jurassic was not the same world. At the Jurassic-Cretaceous transition, marine ecosystems went through turnover. Some pliosaur groups disappeared, while one important lineage, the Brachioconine Pliosaurids, survived into the Cretaceous. Fossil studies describe these Brachioconine Pliosaurids as the only pliosaurid lineage generally considered to have survived the marine amniot turnover around the Jurassic-Cretaceous transition. That means the family had already narrowed. The ocean still had pliosaurs, but not the same broad Jurassic variety. This narrowing matters. A group can still look powerful while becoming more vulnerable. Think of it like a large old tree with fewer and fewer living branches. From far away, it still seems impressive. Up close, you can see that much of its former spread is gone. The surviving pliosaurids of the Cretaceous may still have included large predators, but the wide Jurassic world of giant pliosaurs was changing. They had not been instantly erased, they had been reduced. That reduction likely made them more exposed to later disruption. The Cretaceous oceans were dynamic. Sea levels rose and fell, continents continued moving, seaways opened and closed, ocean chemistry changed, temperatures shifted, new animals appeared and older animals declined. During the middle part of the Cretaceous, one especially important interval was the Cenomanian-Turonian boundary, around 94 million years ago. This interval is associated with major marine disruption, including ocean anoxia, meaning low oxygen conditions in parts of the ocean. A study comparing the early Tortian and Cenomanian-Turonian extinction events described both as significant ecological disruptions and identified anoxia as an important causal mechanism. Low oxygen in the oceans is not a small inconvenience. It can damage food webs from the bottom upward. If oxygen levels fall in parts of the sea, many animals struggle or disappear from those areas. If plankton communities shift, then small feeders are affected. If small feeders are affected, fish and cephalopods are affected. If fish and cephalopods are affected, larger predators feel it too. A huge marine reptile at the top of the food web depends on many smaller things going well below it. A top predator may look independent, but it is really standing on a very tall stack of meals, and tall stacks can wobble. Late Cretaceous pliosaurids did not all vanish at exactly the same instant everywhere, and recent fossil work shows that the picture is still being refined. A 2023 study of Pliosaurus remains from the Upper Cretaceous of Japan found that Pliosaurids survived across the Cenomanian-Turonian boundary in the northwestern Pacific, with one late Turonian specimen showing that the group persisted in that region when the clade was already nearing extinction. That is a good reminder not to tell the story too neatly. Extinction is often patchy. A group may disappear from one region but persist in another. Some populations may survive in refuges. Some fossils may not yet have been found. The last fossil we have is not always the last animal that lived, but the broad trend is clear enough. Pliosaurids were declining, and by the later Cretaceous they were gone from the role they had once held. One study of a gigantic pliosaurid from the Cenomanian of Russia noted that late Cretaceous pliosaurids were generally smaller than older forms and lacked some of the macropredatory features seen in earlier giant taxa, showing a decline toward their extinction in the Turonian. That is an important sentence in calmer clothing. The great heavy-jawed design had lost some of its old dominance. Some Cretaceous relatives were still large, still predatory, still impressive. But the peak Jurassic form, the huge macropredatory Pliosaurid as one of the sea's clearest rulers, was no longer expanding. It was contracting. Why? Partly because the environment changed. Partly because prey communities changed. Partly because other predators entered the picture. And partly because the fossil record does not let us assign one neat cause with perfect confidence. Mosasaurs are often mentioned here, and they do matter, but carefully. Mosasaurs were marine lizards that became major predators later in the Cretaceous. They were not the reason Pliosaurus itself vanished in the Jurassic, and they were probably not a simple one-to-one replacement for the earliest giant pliosaurs. But as pliosaurids declined through the Cretaceous, mosasaurs and other marine predators became more important. By the later Cretaceous, mosasaurs had diversified into major roles in marine ecosystems, while other plesiosaurs, especially long-necked elasmosaurids and short-necked polycotylids, continued until the end Cretaceous extinction. The 2023 Japanese Pliosaurid study notes that long-necked Elasmosauridae and short-necked Polycotylidae are known throughout the Upper Cretaceous, while Pliosauridae appear to have disappeared sometime in the Middle-Late Cretaceous. This means the ocean did not simply stop being reptile-ruled when pliosaurs faded. Other marine reptiles remained. Some thrived. Mosasaurs in particular became famous late Cretaceous predators, but they belonged to a different branch of reptile life, with a different body plan and a different evolutionary story. If Pliosaurus was a heavy-jawed, four-flippered hunter from the plesiosaur line, mosasaurs were marine squamates, relatives of lizards and snakes, with long bodies and powerful tails. The sea had changed its preferred nightmare. One can imagine the old pliosaur design becoming less common, while other designs became more successful. That does not mean the pliosaur design was bad. It had worked for a very long time. But a body plan that succeeds in one ecological setting may struggle in another. If prey sizes shift, if prey speed changes, if feeding grounds change, if oxygen levels affect marine productivity, if competitors and scavengers increase, then the old toolkit may no longer be the best toolkit. There is no shame in that if extinct reptiles can be said to have shame, which seems unlikely and difficult to prove. The rise and fall of top predators often depends on prey. Megalodon gives us a useful later example. It lived in a Cenozoic ocean full of marine mammals, especially whales, and its extinction has been linked to changes in climate, ocean circulation, and prey availability. Smithsonian Ocean explains that around 2.6 million years ago, when Megalodon disappears from the fossil record, large marine mammals were changing in response to climate, ocean cooling, and the formation of the Isthmus of Panama, which altered circulation and likely reduced prey availability for such a huge shark. That is much later than Pliosaurus, but the principle is useful. A giant predator is tied to its prey base. It may look like the ruler of the sea, but it is also dependent on the sea feeding it properly. If the prey changes, the ruler has a problem. If the environment changes the prey, the ruler may not be able to adapt quickly enough. For Pliosaurus and its relatives, the prey base was not whales. Whales did not exist yet. Their world was one of fish, cephalopods, ichthyosaurs, other plesiosaurs, and various marine animals. As the Cretaceous continued, some of those communities changed. Ichthyosaurs themselves disappeared in the late Cretaceous, around the same broad interval of marine disruption. Other marine reptile groups shifted. Fish continued to diversify. Sharks remained important. The entire structure of marine predation was being rearranged. If you remove or reduce certain prey animals, a giant specialist may suffer. If new competitors become better suited to the changed ecosystem, the old predator loses ground. If oxygen stress or climate shifts disrupt reproduction or feeding grounds, large animals with high energy needs can be especially vulnerable. Pliosaurids may have faced several of these pressures at once. It does not require one dramatic villain. Sometimes extinction is a committee, a rather unpleasant committee, but efficient. There is also the issue of size. Being large can be a powerful advantage. It lets an animal attack bigger prey, avoid many predators, travel widely and dominate carcasses, but size is expensive. A large animal needs more food. It may reproduce more slowly. It may take longer to mature. It may be less able to hide from environmental trouble. When ecosystems become unstable, being large can shift from advantage to liability. The same body that once made Pliosaurus dominant also made it dependent on a rich ocean. This is one reason top predators often suffer when food webs disturbed. They are far from the base of the system, but they are not disconnected from it. If the small organisms change, everything above them eventually feels the effect. A Pliosaurus might not care directly about plankton in the way it cared about fish or marine reptiles, but the fish cared about smaller food, and their prey cared about still smaller food. The giant jaw at the top is connected by many steps to tiny lives in the sunlit water. The ocean is very good at reminding large animals that they are not as independent as they look. Another factor is geography. Ancient seas were shaped by continental movement, sea level changes and local conditions. A predator can survive in one region while disappearing elsewhere. The Japanese pliosaurid fossils show that some pliosaurids lasted at least into the late Turonian in the northwestern Pacific, even as the entire group was nearing extinction. That suggests a final scattered presence, not a clean global disappearance all at once. Some populations may have found suitable conditions for longer, others may have vanished earlier. This unevenness is common in extinction. It is not usually a light switching off. It is more like lights going out in different rooms, one by one, until the building is dark. Meanwhile, the future Megalodon world was nowhere close. After pliosaurids vanished, the Cretaceous continued. Mosasaurs rose. Other plesiosaurs persisted. Sharks and bony fish remained important. Then, around 66 million years ago, the end Cretaceous extinction struck, wiping out non-bird dinosaurs on land and eliminating the remaining large marine reptiles, including mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. Only after that did the Cenozoic oceans begin to reorganize around different groups: sharks, bony fish, marine mammals, seabirds, and eventually the whales that would help define Megalodon's later world. This is the vast middle space people often skip. Pliosaurus did not vanish and leave the sea waiting for Megalodon. After the pliosaurs came other rulers. After them came extinction. After extinction came recovery. Mammals entered the sea. Early whales evolved from land-dwelling ancestors. Marine ecosystems rebuilt themselves through the Paleogene. Sharks continued and diversified. The world cooled, seaways changed, and by the Miocene, the stage existed for Megalodon. That stage was not Jurassic at all. It was a newer ocean with marine mammals, different currents, different prey, and a very different food web. Megalodon's rise depended on that world. It was a shark, not a reptile. It had a cartilaginous skeleton, teeth that fossilized well, and a lifestyle tied to warm and temperate coastal seas where whales and other marine mammals lived. Britannica states that Megalodon fossils are found from the early Miocene to the end of the Pliocene, and that its distribution expanded in the Miocene before contracting in the Pliocene. So the difference between Pliosaurus and Megalodon is not just animal versus animal, it is world versus world. Pliosaurus lived in a Mesozoic ocean, where marine reptiles held many major roles. Ammonites and belemnites were common, and dinosaurs ruled the land nearby. Megalodon lived in a Cenozoic ocean, after the dinosaurs were gone, after the marine reptiles were gone, when whales had become important and mammals were deeply involved in marine life. One was part of the age of reptiles, the other was part of the age after that. They are separated not only by time, but by ecological architecture. That is why the title, Before Megalodon, matters. It does not mean slightly earlier, it means a whole older ocean. Pliosaurus vanished because the ocean that made it successful did not last. The plesiosaur line weathered many changes, but not all of them. Through the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous, its diversity narrowed, its dominance shifted, and by the Middle Late Cretaceous, pliosaurids were near the end. Climate and ocean chemistry disruptions, changing prey communities, competition, and ecological turnover all likely played roles. But the honest answer is that we cannot point to one single cause with perfect certainty. The fossil record gives us the pattern more clearly than the private details of every extinction. And perhaps that is enough for the story, because the disappearance of Pliosaurus is not only a loss, it is also a reminder that ruling the sea is temporary. Every ocean ruler is fitted to a particular world. Change the world enough, and even the strongest jaws may no longer be enough. Pliosaurus had the skull, the bite, the body, and the place near the top of the food web. For millions of years that was enough. Then the sea changed, as seas always do. Imagine one of the last great pliosaurids moving through a Cretaceous sea. It is still impressive. Its jaws are still dangerous. Smaller animals still move away. It still surfaces to breathe and dives with power. But the world around it is not the old Jurassic world. The prey is different. The competitors are different. The water chemistry may be changing. Other predators are rising in distant seas. Its lineage is thinner than it once was. No single animal knows its kind is declining. It simply lives. It hunts when hungry. It avoids injury. It searches for prey. It rises for air. It moves through water that has carried its ancestors for generations. It does not know that future humans will place it before Megalodon in the long story of sea monsters. It does not know that its whole branch of life is close to disappearing. Extinction is usually not experienced as extinction by the creatures inside it. It is experienced as harder seasons, fewer young, stranger seas, scarcer food, and finally no descendants left to continue the line. Then, eventually, there are no pliosaurids. The ocean does not become empty. Fish still move, sharks still hunt, other reptiles still patrol. Later, mosasaurs become some of the great predators of the late Cretaceous. Then they vanish too. The ammonites vanish. The non-bird dinosaurs vanish. The world resets in a way far larger than the end of Pliosaurus. After the impact and the long recovery, New marine communities take shape. Mammals return to the sea and become whales. Sharks continue their ancient story. And much later, in those newer waters, Megalodon rises. By then, Pliosaurus is not a memory in the sea. It is stone. Its bones lie in sediments. Its teeth are hidden in cliffs. Its skull waits in rock while oceans shift above it. No whale hears it. No Megalodon senses it. The two great predators belong to different books in Earth's long library, not different pages in the same scene. The only place they meet is in our imagination, when we line up prehistoric giants and try to understand who ruled before whom. And that imagination is useful, as long as we keep it honest. Pliosaurus ruled before Megalodon, not because it was the first version of the same monster, but because the sea has repeatedly produced large predators when conditions allow. Give the ocean enough prey, enough time, and enough ecological space, and something large will eventually take shape near the top. Sometimes it has flippers and lungs and a reptile skull. Sometimes it has cartilage, gills and shark teeth. Sometimes it is a whale with intelligence and sound. The ocean does not repeat itself exactly. It experiments. Pliosaurus was one of those experiments. Megalodon was another. Between them lay extinction, recovery, and a planet remaking its seas. So when we think of Pliosaurus vanishing, it is worth doing so without making it seem like failure. Extinction is not always failure in the ordinary sense. A group can survive for tens of millions of years and still disappear. That is not a short story. That is a long success with an ending. Pliosaurs were among the dominant marine predators of their time. They lived, adapted, hunted, reproduced, and shaped their ecosystems across enormous stretches of deep time. The fact that they are gone now does not erase that. It only makes their fossils more important, because fossils are what remain after the living line ends. They are the sea's old receipts. A skull in Dorset, teeth in Poland, fragmentary remains in Japan, giant bones in Svalbard. They show us that the pliosaur story did not vanish completely. It ended biologically, but it survived geologically. The animal left the water, not by climbing onto land, but by becoming part of stone. And now, when we stand in front of those remains, we are seeing a ruler after its kingdom has changed beyond recognition. The heavy jaws no longer close, the flippers no longer move, the lungs no longer rise with air from the surface. The sea that held it is gone, replaced by new oceans, new coastlines, new animals, and eventually by us, looking back with soft voices and late-night curiosity. Pliosaurus vanished before Megalodon rose because Earth did what Earth always does. It changed the rules. It rearranged the seas. It removed old opportunities and created new ones. It allowed one giant predator to disappear, waited through tens of millions of years of other stories, and then allowed another to rise in a different age. And if we follow that thought a little farther, we arrive at the quieter ending beneath all the teeth and scale and size. The ocean remembers no ruler forever. It keeps moving. It keeps replacing. It keeps burying the old world under the next one. But sometimes, if the mud is right, if the bones settle well, if the cliff breaks open at just the right moment, the old ruler returns without moving at all. And there it is, after all that time, lifted from stone and placed once more in front of living eyes. A skull that once moved through warm Jurassic water now rests in a museum. Teeth that once gripped struggling prey now sit still under careful light. Bones that were buried before birds sang in modern forests, before whales crossed the oceans, before humans learned to make fire, now help us picture an animal that never knew it would be remembered. That is one of the quiet surprises of fossils. They do not bring the animal back, not really, but they let its shape return. They let a lost world become visible for a moment, just enough for us to lean closer and say, so this was here before us. Pliosaurus was here before almost everything familiar, before Megalodon, before the first true whales, before seals, dolphins and sea lions. before grasslands spread across the continents, before the modern coastlines we know, it belonged to an ocean where reptiles filled many of the large roles that mammals and sharks hold today. It surfaced for air under skies without gulls. It hunted in seas where ammonites drifted, ichthyosaurs swam, long-necked plesiosaurs searched for food, and fish flashed through warm water. The world was not waiting for us. It was already busy, already dangerous, already full of lives beginning and ending in ways no one would ever see. That may be the most important thing to remember as we leave this ancient sea behind. Pliosaurus was not only a monster, it was not only a comparison point for Megalodon. It was not only a large skull, a set of teeth, or a name in a book. It was an animal, a living body, a breathing reptile, a hunter that had to find food, avoid injury, rise to the surface, grow, compete, rest, and survive inside the limits of its own world. It had no idea that one day people would call it a sea monster. It had no idea that its bones would become evidence. It had no idea that, long after its ocean changed beyond recognition, a person might lie awake at night listening to its story in a quiet room. And yet, here we are. We began with the ocean before Megalodon, that older sea where the famous shark had not yet appeared and the great marine reptiles still held their place. We moved through the Jurassic water, watching the old food webs take shape, seeing how life in those seas supported predators large enough to make the surface feel less safe. We met Pliosaurus as a heavy-jawed giant, not a shark, not a dinosaur, not a whale, but a marine reptile with a huge skull and a body made for the water. We looked at the flippers that carried it forward, the short neck that held the head close to the body, and the bite that made it one of the most powerful hunters in its world. We followed that bite into the ancient menu. Fish, squid-like animals, other marine reptiles, carcasses that drifted out from land or sank through the water. We saw that a top predator does not live outside the food web, but inside it, depending on smaller creatures, shifting currents, and all the hidden work of the sea. Then we came to the fossils, the skulls, the teeth, the fragments, the careful hands that found them, prepared them, studied them, and rebuilt the animal from stone. Finally, we watched the old line fade, not because Megalodon replaced it, but because the world changed. The sea rearranged itself. The great pliosaurs disappeared. Other predators rose. Much later, in a different ocean, Megalodon entered the story. That is how deep time works, not as one single scene, but as many worlds stacked behind each other. We often place prehistoric animals together because they all feel equally ancient from where we stand. Pliosaurus, Megalodon, Tyrannosaurus, mammoths, giant sloths, all of them can seem like neighbours in the same distant past. But they were not neighbours. They were separated by millions, sometimes tens of millions, sometimes more than 100 million years. Pliosaurus had already vanished long before Megalodon appeared. Megalodon had already vanished long before modern humans built ships, drew maps, or started telling stories about sea monsters in the dark. The past is much larger than our imagination first allows, and the ocean has changed its rulers many times. There were ages when marine reptiles dominated, ages when mosasaurs replaced pliosaurs in many predator roles, ages after the end Cretaceous extinction when the seas had to recover and rebuild, ages when whales returned to the water from land-dwelling ancestors and became huge, ages when giant sharks hunted marine mammals. Today our seas have orcas, great white sharks, sperm whales, giant squid, seals, tuna, sea turtles, deep sea fish, and animals we're still discovering. The ocean is not finished. It never has been. But it also keeps records. Not perfect records. Not neat records. The sea does not file reports. It does not preserve every body, every hunt, every migration, every birth, every quiet afternoon of an ancient animal resting near the surface. Most of life disappears. Most bones break. most traces vanish. Yet sometimes a skull settles into mud, a tooth falls into sediment, a jaw becomes buried before it can be destroyed, a cliff forms, hardens, waits, and one day cracks open. Then the old world has a voice again, not a loud one but clear enough. A tooth tells us there was a mouth, a skull tells us there was a head, a bite mark tells us that two animals met and one of them did not leave unchanged. That is how Pliosaurus reaches us, not by swimming forward through time, but by leaving pieces behind. Pieces strong enough to outlast mountains rising, coastlines shifting, climates changing, species appearing and disappearing, and humans finally arriving with questions. There is something almost funny about that. A creature that once ruled through strength is now known through stillness. Its power is gone, but its shape remains. Its bite no longer closes, but its teeth still make the story clear, and perhaps that is why ancient predators hold our attention so strongly. They frighten us a little, of course. A giant marine reptile with jaws longer than a person is not exactly a comforting mental image if you're planning a swim. But there is more to it than fear. Animals like Pliosaurus make the past feel real. They remind us that the Earth was not always arranged for us. They show us that life has taken forms we would never invent on our own. They make the familiar ocean feel older, deeper, and stranger. A calm beach, a grey cliff, a quiet wave line. All of it may sit above a history filled with teeth. Not teeth waiting for us, just teeth that were once part of life. That distinction matters. Pliosaurus is not lurking somewhere in the modern deep. It is gone. Its world is gone. The Jurassic seas that held it have changed into stone, cliffs, museum specimens, and scientific papers. Megalodon is gone too. The idea that these animals might still be hiding in some untouched part of the ocean can be fun for stories, but it is not what the evidence shows. The real wonder is not that they might still be out there. The real wonder is that they were ever here at all. They lived on this same planet. Not a fantasy planet, not a mythic sea. Earth. The same Earth that now has traffic lights, weather apps, grocery stores, beach towels, and people falling asleep to science videos. The same Earth once had warm Jurassic water, where Pliosaurus moved with 4 flippers and a skull full of teeth. That is a lot for one planet to contain. It makes our own moment feel both small and special. Small, because so much came before us. Special, because we're able to look back and understand even a little of it. And now, as this story comes to rest, I want to bring us back from that ancient water slowly. The Jurassic Sea fades first. The ammonites drift out of view. The ichthyosaurs disappear into distance. The long-necked plesiosaurs become shapes, then shadows, then fossils. The heavy head of Pliosaurus turns once beneath the surface, not in anger, not in drama, just as an animal moving through its world. The flippers push water back. The body sinks lower. The surface smooths above it. Then the scene is gone. What remains is stone. A cliff face. A beach after a storm. A fossil hunter noticing a shape that does not quite belong. A skull cleaned grain by grain. A museum visitor standing still longer than expected. A listener tonight, maybe with eyes closed, picturing the sea before Megalodon and the reptile that ruled it first. That is enough. We do not need Pliosaurus to be bigger than every other predator. We do not need it to win imaginary battles. We do not need it to roar, chase boats, or wait in the deep for modern swimmers. The real animal is already more interesting. It belonged to a time so distant that our minds have to stretch to hold it. It survived in a dangerous ocean for as long as its world allowed. It left behind fossils that still change what we know. And it reminds us that every ruler of the sea, no matter how strong, lives only while the sea permits it. The waves keep moving. They moved over the Jurassic coastlines. They moved after Pliosaurus vanished. They moved when Megalodon hunted. They moved after Megalodon was gone. They moved tonight somewhere out there against rocks, sand, harbours, islands and dark open water. The animals change. The coastlines change. The names change. But the sea keeps working, carrying life, hiding history, and sometimes returning a piece of the past to the shore. So let me ask you once more, gently, before we finish. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you near the ocean, where waves might actually be moving not too far away? Or are you far inland, with the sea only in your mind for now? And what time is it where you are? It feels fitting to ask again, after travelling from the Jurassic to the age of Megalodon, and back to this quiet moment. We have crossed more than 100 million years together, and somehow we have arrived here, in the same small pocket of night. If this journey gave you a little calm, a little curiosity, or simply a quiet place to rest your thoughts, I'd be ever so grateful if you gave the video a like and maybe subscribed. It helps Life Beyond Seen. Continue making these gentle trips through science, history, deep time and the stranger corners of nature. And if you know someone who loves prehistoric animals, ancient oceans, or falling asleep while learning something mildly unsettling about teeth, perhaps send this their way. For now, though, there is nothing more you need to do. The sea monster has returned to the dark water of the past. The fossils are safe in their cases and collections. The cliffs can wait for another tide. The old ocean can settle, and you can let the story loosen its hold. Pliosaurus ruled before Megalodon, but even that great predator became part of the quiet record beneath our feet. Its bones remind us that power does not last forever, that worlds change, and that even the largest jaws eventually fall still. But they also remind us that nothing is entirely lost if some trace remains, and if someone someday is willing to look closely. So rest now, fellow traveller. The ancient waves are far away. The heavy jaws are closed. The old ruler is only an echo beneath the waves. Sleep well wherever and whenever you are.